Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into ancient Rome just as the sun slides behind the Capitol Hill, turning the marble temples a warm, sleepy gold. You feel the air cool against your skin as the crowds thin, leaving only the echo of sandals on stone and the faint scent of olive oil drifting from taverns. It's one of those evenings when the whole city seems to exhale, and you can almost pretend you're just here to enjoy the view. Except you're heading toward a place where nobody relaxes. The slave market waits for you, and honestly, you probably won't survive this without at least a little emotional turbulence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the map of this little bedtime crew fill out. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the stone-paved Argiletum, the narrow street that funnels you straight toward the Forum. Shops are closing, metal shutters sliding down, but a few vendors still shout last-minute offers: figs, cheap wine, a slightly lopsided clay lamp that you're 90% sure would explode on first lighting. Rome is a city of noise, but tonight the sound softens into a murmur, like the whole place is tucking itself in. Your sandals scuff the ground, stirring little puffs of dust that glitter in torchlight, and with each step you feel the gravity of where you're going. The Forum is still awake, though, because Rome never fully sleeps. A couple of senators glide past you, wrapped in pristine togas that look almost glow-in-the-dark against the fading daylight. They don't look at you, classic senator behavior. A group of teenagers sprint across the plaza, laughing too loudly, definitely up to mischief. Somewhere nearby, a flute player attempts a tune that historians still argue whether was an early pop hit, or just the ancient equivalent of elevator music. As you move deeper into the heart of the city, a faint tension prickles at the edge of your awareness. You're getting closer. You can almost feel the direction like a compass needle tugging your steps. And with that comes the awareness that this journey isn't just sightseeing. It's a front-row seat to Rome's most unsettling open secret: the buying and selling of human beings. The air shifts subtly here. A breeze carries hints of sweat, lamp smoke, and something metallic you can't quite place. You catch snippets of conversation, someone arguing about a debt, someone else bargaining for grain, and a street philosopher rambling about the immortality of the soul, even though he's clearly had too much wine. But your focus keeps drifting forward, to the part of the Forum where the ground slopes gently down, forming a natural bowl that funnels crowds into one concentrated space. Perfect for spectacle, perfect for trade. Rome used slave labor everywhere: households, farms, mines, workshops, even temples. A mainstream fact you probably know: at certain points, enslaved people may have made up a third of the population. But what you might not know is the quirky little detail that sellers sometimes dyed a slave's hair blonde with goat fat and ash to make them look more exotic and therefore pricier. You wouldn't think ash would boost market value, but Rome was nothing if not committed to questionable beauty standards. You pass a row of statues, old generals frozen mid-boast, and their blank eyes watch you head toward the place most people pretend not to see. Torches cluster thicker ahead, forming a flickering halo in the evening haze. The stone beneath your feet warms again as you re-enter a pocket of activity. It's subtle, but you can tell the marketplace is still active even this late. Deals didn't always end at sundown. Desperation and opportunity never kept office hours. The slave market sits just past a row of temporary stalls. Earlier in the day, these stalls would have been stuffed with produce and cheap pottery. Now, they're half abandoned. A bored donkey swats flies with its tail. A vendor snores loudly beside a basket of pomegranates he definitely should have taken home. You sidestep a puddle of spilled wine that smells exactly like regret. Then you see it. Your first clear glimpse of the district you came for. A cluster of wooden platforms rises from the open square like uneven steps. Each is topped with a vertical post and a wooden board large enough to hang a placard. Even from this distance, you feel the shift in atmosphere. People still talk here, but the tone is clipped, purposeful. Eyes dart, weigh, calculate. You pause at the edge of the square, letting the moment stretch. The torchlight paints everything orange, softening the outlines but sharpening the shadows. A cold thought settles. This is where lives are rerouted in the span of a few shouted bids. You take a slow step in, then another. You feel Rome's pulse under your feet, the mix of ambition and brutality that built the empire brick by brick. Every great structure, every victorious campaign, every legend whispered through the centuries rests in some way on the backs of people who never chose their path. A man brushes past you, muttering to himself as he counts coins. Behind him, a woman in a simple stola grips her husband's arm, whispering intensely while she eyes the platforms. Maybe they're here to buy a household servant. Maybe they're here because their social status demands it. Rome is complicated like that. Everyone climbing, everyone performing. You keep walking, letting the crowd slowly pull you deeper. Your sandals crunch over a scattering of straw that wasn't there earlier, and your nose picks up another familiar scent, olive oil mixed with stress. Sellers love oil. It makes skin shine under torchlight. Buyers love stress, makes their bids more dramatic. As you move toward the platforms, your breathing slows, matching the heavy cadence of the city at night. Whatever comes next, this is the moment the world narrows. The forum fades behind you. The market rises ahead. The torch flames whip in the wind like restless spirits guiding you inside. You inhale once, deeply. You've officially stepped into Rome's slave market. You ease farther into the square, letting the hum of activity wrap around you like a too-warm blanket. Even at night, the market hasn't fully quieted. A handful of buyers linger with the same intensity as people who browse used cars at 11 p.m., and with about the same level of trust issues. The torches crackle overhead, spraying sparks that vanish before they touch the ground, and their wavering light reveals your first full glimpse of the market you came to witness. The platforms dominate the space, each one a rough wooden stage raised just high enough so buyers don't have to crane their necks. You can tell which platforms have seen heavy use today. They're darker, scuffed with heel marks, and dusted with the remnants of chalk used earlier to highlight muscles or hide bruises. The boards hanging from each post sway gently, and though you can't read all the words from where you stand, you know the categories by heart: origin, age, skills, temperament, physical condition. Rome loves its labels. Nothing like a tidy bullet point list to turn a person into a purchase. A seller calls out from the nearest platform, his voice sharp and bright like a trumpet note that refuses to die. He's trying to catch the attention of the last few buyers still milling around. You watch him gesture dramatically, almost theatrically, as if this is a stage performance. Honestly, it kind of is. In Rome, the slave market isn't just commerce, it's spectacle. And you feel the strange pull of that spectacle even though you're trying not to. A young man stands on the platform beside the seller. He's maybe 17, thin but sturdy, with a posture that tells you he's been instructed exactly how to stand. The seller jabs a finger at the placard hanging beside him. Cappadocian, farm-trained, no known ailments. The boy's eyes flick across the crowd, landing on you for a heartbeat. There's something like exhaustion in them, an old heaviness you don't expect in someone so young. You shift your weight. You didn't come here to buy anything, but the place makes you feel like you're participating just by looking. One mainstream fact slides into your thoughts. Roman law required sellers to disclose defects, illnesses, a tendency to run away, behavioral issues. If they lied, they could be sued. But that didn't stop them from forgetting to mention some things or creatively redefining others. You'll see plenty of that tonight. Rome is full of rules, but it's also full of loopholes, and sellers treat loopholes like a sport. A quirky detail catches your eye. Someone has sprinkled fine sawdust across one of the platforms, supposedly to keep things clean. But you watch a stray dog wander up, sniff deeply, and flop down on the fresh layer like it's a luxurious hotel bed. The seller nearby groans, shoos the dog away, and then, because this is Rome, quietly smooths the sawdust back into place as if nothing happened. Presentation matters, even when a dog tries to stage a soft protest nap. You walk closer. The air around the platforms carries a tension thicker than the smoke rising from the torches. Buyers murmur to each other, calculating prices in their heads. You hear words like docile, reliable, educated, strong shoulders, knows Greek, and an occasional "the last one I bought tried to stab my cook," which is a whole story you wish you could hear more of, but the buyer is already drifting away. Everywhere you glance, you see different stages of the same ritual. Sellers guide buyers up onto the platforms for closer inspection. Buyers pinch a forearm here, check teeth there, Ask someone to walk a few paces to observe gait. You're struck by how routine it all feels. Mechanized. Like watching people choose ripe fruit, except the fruit can look back at you. You shift again, uncomfortable, and then you notice a small crowd forming around one particular platform. Something's happening. You drift toward it, letting the current pull you. The buyer at the center is older, wealthy by the look of his heavy ring, and he's examining a young woman whose placard boasts literate, skilled weaver, previous household experience. The seller beams with rehearsed confidence. The buyer narrows his eyes, unconvinced. The crowd draws closer, hungry for drama. Rome loves drama even more than commerce. And then it happens. A perfect moment of quiet comedy that slices through the tension. The seller, trying to demonstrate the woman's weaving skill, pulls out a tiny basket she supposedly crafted. Except when he gives it a proud shake, the basket collapses like a wet noodle. The crowd snickers. You try not to laugh, but honestly it's a solid 3 out of 10 joke delivered unintentionally. Even the buyer cracks a smile, which, in Rome, is basically a rave review. Still, he asks the seller to swear the woman has no illnesses. The seller hesitates just long enough to be suspicious. You can practically hear the gears grinding in the buyer's head. Historians still argue whether sellers often bribed physicians for false certifications or if that's just one of those ancient urban legends. But watching the seller fidget, you're leaning toward probably. The buyer walks away, unimpressed. The crowd disperses. The seller sighs dramatically, mutters something about ignorant customers, and begins straightening the woman's posture again, as if resetting the scene for the next attempt. You continue exploring, easing between the remaining buyers. A man in a faded tunic haggles aggressively over a teenage boy with carpenter skills. Another buyer complains loudly that the last person he purchased couldn't even read the simplest tally marks, which sounds suspiciously like the buyer actually couldn't read them either. Rome is a city where everyone blames everyone else for everything. A cold breeze flows across the square, making the torches tremble. You rub your arms, suddenly aware of how vulnerable everyone here is. Buyers, sellers, enslaved people, even you standing on the sidelines. You're not being evaluated, but you feel evaluated all the same. The market has that effect. It's a machine designed to reduce complexity into simple transactions, and being near it makes you hyper-aware of your own humanity. You step back slightly, watching the last few deals unfold. Coins clink, voices rise. The young Cappadocian boy from earlier is finally led away by a middle-aged couple who seem neither cruel nor kind, just practical. You hope practicality leans in his favour, but Rome doesn't guarantee anything. The night deepens, the square thins. You've seen your first glimpse, enough to know this place isn't just a marketplace. It's a hinge in countless lives, swinging hard in one direction or another with every decision made here. And you feel yourself pulled forward, deeper into the story. You move closer to the nearest wooden platform, the boards creaking faintly under the shifting weight of people being displayed. Up close, the stage feels less like a marketplace, and more like a spotlight no one wants to stand in. You look up at the placard hanging next to the current figure, a man in his 30s with a calm, distant gaze, and it hits you how much information Rome tries to compress into a few scribbled lines. It's the ancient equivalent of a product spec sheet, except the product can hear every word. The seller clears his throat, leans forward, and announces the man's traits to the cluster of buyers gathered below. He speaks with that overly bright enthusiasm of someone who has repeated the same pitch so many times he could recite it underwater. You hear him shout, "Healthy, strong, knows basic Greek, good labourer." You notice he doesn't mention the small scar on the man's forearm. Maybe it's harmless, maybe it's not. Maybe the seller is hoping the crowd won't notice. There's always something being left out here. The seller waves dramatically, turning the man around like he's presenting a new statue. And to be fair, Rome did love statues. If these platforms had marble bases instead of patched wood, buyers might forget the difference entirely. You watch as one buyer steps forward to inspect the man's posture. Another checks his hands, calloused, steady, no tremors. A third buyer taps his chin thoughtfully while staring at the placard as if expecting it to sprout new information if he squints hard enough. What really catches your attention, though, is the seller's smile. It's too crisp, too confident, too perfectly glued to his face. You realize this smile is part of the routine. Behind the smile is calculation. Behind the calculation is pressure. Sellers aren't neutral here, they're competitors. If they don't move inventory, they don't eat. And in Rome, failing to eat is just the polite prelude to failing to live. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Sellers were legally required to stand on elevated platforms and hang placards listing any known defects. Transparency was part of the performance. But right beneath that, like an actor forgetting a line, comes the reality that sellers often stage their presentations. A fresh oil rub on the skin to hide malnutrition, a quick rinse of clothes to disguise smell, a bit of charcoal dust to fill thinning eyebrows. Rome didn't invent advertising spin, but they definitely refined it. You step to the side as the crowd thins. Another seller climbs onto a different platform. He's younger, sweaty, and desperately trying to control a goat that keeps headbutting his shins. You're still not sure why a goat is here. Maybe accidental inventory, but the scene is comedic enough that you let out a soft snort. That's joke number 1 for this stretch, and the goat absolutely earned it. He finally manages to secure the goat, then gestures to the woman next to him. Her placard lists skills in cooking, cleaning, and childcare. She lifts her chin slightly as the buyers inspect her, and you admire the quiet defiance in that tiny movement. The seller, meanwhile, keeps pushing his sales pitch with the frantic energy of a street performer who knows he's losing his audience. He even pulls out a jug of wine and offers the crowd a taste, as if hospitality will distract them from the price. One buyer whispers to another that the wine tastes like someone strained it through old socks. You pretend you didn't hear that, but your face knows you did. The inspections continue with a strangely rhythmic flow. Sellers call, buyers respond, placards sway, bodies shift. The torches flare like impatient gods watching the transactions below. Every moment feels both deeply mundane and impossibly heavy. You can't decide whether the market resembles a theatre or an assembly line, and maybe that's the point. It's both. A place where performance meets pragmatism. You wander toward another platform where an elderly seller stands beside a muscular Thracian man. The seller looks like he's been doing this since Romulus himself was still picking out baby sandals. His voice is calm, measured, almost soothing. You can tell he's not one for theatrics. Instead, he relies on reputation, a powerful currency in Rome. Buyers listen closely, nodding at his every word. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. Some sellers cultivated personas like celebrities, drawing crowds simply because people trusted them not to lie. Whether they actually lied less is still up for debate. The Thracian man remains quiet, gaze distant. When a buyer asks about his training, the seller mentions farm work and light construction. The buyer arches an eyebrow, clearly expecting more from someone built like a gladiator. Not trained for the arena, the seller insists. Too valuable elsewhere. Historians still argue whether sellers underplayed gladiatorial potential to avoid buyers who wanted a bargain, or overplayed it to attract risk-loving gamblers. The truth probably depended on the day. As you watch, you start noticing the choreography behind everything. Sellers position bodies to catch torchlight just right. They instruct people when to raise their arms, when to look strong, when to look gentle. You see a seller discreetly pinch a young man's cheeks to bring a bit of colour to his face. Another dabs oil onto someone's forearms for shine. And yet another slightly tilts a girl's head so the crowd doesn't see a small scar until after the bidding starts. You whisper under your breath, so this is Rome's version of a photo filter. The guy next to you hears it and chuckles. Joke 2. Accidental, but we'll take it. A platform nearby erupts in heated discussion. A buyer complains loudly that the placard says good temperament, while the person displayed has just snarled at him. The seller responds with a straight face. Only snarls at rude people. You're not sure if this is genius improvisation or ridiculous denial, but you nearly choke trying not to laugh. Joke 3 delivered. Ancient customer service at its finest. The night grows thicker, the sky darker, the torches brighter. The platforms cast long shadows that stretch before you, like paths into uncertain futures. Every display, every negotiation, every scribbled placard is a crossroads. You stand at the edge of one of those shadows, absorbing the gravity of this strange, brutal choreography. And as you step quietly around another platform, watching yet another life assessed under flickering firelight, the story pulls you deeper, guiding you toward the unseen machinery behind these performances. You slip around the back of the platforms, drawn by the faint rustle of movement and the hushed tones that don't quite match. the polished confidence on display out front. If the auction stages are Rome's glossy storefronts, then behind the seller's smile is the cramped, messy stockroom, and this is where the truth sweats through the seams. The first thing you notice is the smell. Not a foul one exactly, but a dense mixture of oil, damp wood, wool, and the unmistakable tang of nerves. Torches burn lower here, their light flickering over stacked crates, coiled ropes, and narrow benches where people wait to be brought onto the platforms. You see a woman smoothing her hair with trembling fingers, a boy rubbing dust from his ankles, and a man staring at the ground as though memorizing it. You realize this area is the heartbeat of the market, the part the buyers never see, the part the sellers pretend doesn't exist. A seller hurries past you carrying a small clay jar. You watch him dab a bit of oil onto the cheeks of a middle-aged man who looks exhausted enough to sleep standing up. The seller clucks his tongue. "Chin up," he murmurs, lifting the man's face. No one pays good money for droopy posture. The man obeys, though the droop in his eyes tells you he can't hide everything. Sellers here are half merchants, half stage managers, constantly adjusting angles and appearances to make the next sale smoother. You move deeper. Behind a row of crates, two sellers whisper intensely. "The limp is barely noticeable in low light," one says. "Just keep him on the left side of the platform." The other nods, as though rearranging shadows is a perfectly legitimate pricing tactic. A mainstream historical fact clicks into place. Roman law required sellers to declare defects, but conveniently failing to highlight them was another story. Declaration in Rome often meant, mention it softly and hope no one was listening. You spot a pile of chalk and understand instantly. This is the stuff sellers use to brighten skin or outline muscle definition. A seller nearby grabs a pinch and drags it lightly over a young man's biceps. The result? A makeshift ancient highlight and contour routine. Quirky fringe tidbit. Some sellers even used crushed marble dust for extra sparkle. Basically, Rome's version of beauty influencers hyping a new glow serum. Behind another curtain of woven reed, a woman sits while a seller briskly braids her hair, muttering the entire time about presentation, presentation, presentation. He punctuates each point by tightening a braid just a bit too sharply. The woman winces but stays silent. In a softer moment, he reaches for a little pot of coal, carefully lining her eyes. Not out of kindness, you can tell, but because buyers love alert-looking attendants. You're watching a transformation more nuanced than anything happening on the platforms. This is preparation with stakes measured in lives. You slip past a cluttered table where a seller has laid out small props, a stylus, a tablet, a woven basket, even a carpenter's mallet. You realize these aren't tools, they're stage cues. If the seller hands someone a stylus, the buyers assume literacy, or at least familiarity. If someone holds a mallet, they must be a skilled labourer. It's all part of the narrative building. You mutter to yourself, Rome invented resume padding, and a seller passing by gives you a puzzled look. Joke 1. Just then, a ruckus erupts behind you. A young man, maybe 16, accidentally knocks over a jug of water. The seller supervising him groans dramatically and slaps his forehead. "This is why we can't ask for a higher price," he laments loudly, though he quickly grabs a cloth to dab the boy's tunic, smoothing the fabric back into acceptable order. You can tell the seller isn't angry, just stressed. Every drip, every wrinkle, every scuffed sandal threatens the illusion. You move farther back and find a seller coaching a girl with large, frightened eyes. "Smile just a little," he instructs, adjusting her shoulders. "Not too much. You'll look desperate. Just calm. Calm sells." She mimics the expression, but it sits awkwardly on her face like a borrowed cloak. The seller sighs. Close enough. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes loudly, and another seller shouts, "Not out there, please." Buyers think sneezing is contagious weakness. You suppress a laugh. Joke 2 lands safely. Near the far corner, you spot something interesting. An elderly man applying a poultice to another man's swollen knee. Not a physician exactly, but clearly someone who knows enough herbal remedies to reduce swelling before an inspection. Historians still argue whether these behind-the-scenes caretakers were hired by sellers or enslaved people helping one another. The ambiguity lingers like incense smoke. You lean against a support beam and observe the rhythm of the backstage world. Sellers bustle, fuss, rehearse. Enslaved people adjust their posture, wipe their faces, breathe deeply, brace themselves. It's a dance, chaotic but consistent. The market relies on this behind-the-scenes polishing to present a smoother, shinier, more desirable front. Then you hear something unexpected. Laughter. Light, brief but real. You glance over and see two sellers joking as they repair a broken sandal strap. One nudges the other with an elbow. "Maybe we should sell the sandals," he quips. "They've lasted longer than some of our stock." The other groans but laughs anyway. It's dark humour, sure, but humour nonetheless. Joke 3 for the section. You step away before they notice you eavesdropping. The torchlight flickers against the underside of the platforms, casting strange, shifting shapes on the ground. Echoes of the people above, memories of the people yet to be displayed. For all its noise, the back area holds a quiet truth. Nothing here is spontaneous. Every word, every gesture, every tiny adjustment contributes to the facade buyers expect from the front-facing spectacle. The sellers' smiles aren't mirroring their hearts. They're masks carved carefully to keep the market running. And as you drift back toward the platform steps, you feel the weight of those masks, the labour behind them, and the lives shaped by their performance. You ease back toward the front of the platforms, but now your eyes have changed. After seeing the backstage scramble, smoothed hair, oiled skin, rearranged shadows, you can't unsee it. Every display out here feels sharper, more deliberate. You watch buyers stroll past with the casual entitlement of people shopping for olives, and you feel the quiet tension radiating from the bodies on stage. This place isn't just about who gets purchased. It's also about price tags on human lives, and the calculations are as chilling as they are methodical. You stop beside a platform where a seller is unrolling a long scroll covered in neat numerical columns. It's a price list. Not official, just his personal guide scribbled with notes like young, they are expensive, and sick in discount. He glances at you and gives a proud nod as though you're admiring an artist's masterpiece. Rome loves lists. Sellers love lists even more. It keeps their world predictable, even when nothing else is. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Age, origin, and skills were the big three factors shaping price. A healthy young adult from Gaul or Thrace, that's a solid investment. A literate Greek tutor? Now you're talking premium luxury. A child? Surprisingly expensive because buyers believed they could be shaped. Elderly or visibly ill? Deep discounts. Rome invented the tiered pricing model long before modern retail thought it was clever. You watch a buyer approach the platform, chin lifted, purse jangling. His gaze scans the options like someone trying to pick ripe fruit. He asks the price of a 20-year-old man whose placard lists fieldwork, basic Latin, obedient. The seller names a number high enough to make your stomach clench. The buyer doesn't flinch. That tells you everything you need to know about his budget. The seller then gestures to a woman with a placard boasting, literate in Greek, skilled in accounts. Her asking price is even higher, and suddenly the crowd shifts. People murmur. Greek literacy is like the gold-plated edition of human skills in Rome. If someone can keep your books or tutor your children, you're not just upgrading your household, you're upgrading your status. Buyers love that. You step aside to let a new group pass. One man points at a teenager on a platform and asks the seller, "Why so cheap?" The seller lifts one shoulder casually. "From Britannia. They're stubborn." The buyer nods solemnly, as though this explains everything. A quirky fringe fact pops into your thoughts. Romans believed people from certain regions had specific temperaments. Egyptians crafty, Germans fierce, Syrians clever, Britons slow to adapt. Completely unscientific, obviously, but Rome adored stereotypes like they were carved in marble. A sudden laugh catches your attention. A buyer has spotted two nearly identical teenage brothers with dramatically different price tags. "Why is he worth 30 more?" he asks, pointing from one boy to the other. The seller beams with the confidence of someone who has rehearsed this answer. "This one sings beautifully," he says, patting the pricier boy. The brother scowls. The buyer asks if he can hear a sample. The boy refuses. The crowd waits. The seller nudges him. The boy sings a short note, flat, barely there, clearly embarrassed. The crowd titters. You whisper, "That's worth 30? Joke 1. Still, the buyer pays. Whether the singing was bad or not, the perceived uniqueness adds value. Rome is a sucker for novelty. You continue walking as the atmosphere shifts into subtle competition. Buyers attempt to outmaneuver each other with feigned disinterest. Sellers quote inflated prices just to anchor expectations. Some buyers pretend to walk away, hoping the seller will panic and lower the number. Others puff out their chests, announcing to the crowd, "I'll pay it," not because they need the person, but because they enjoy the spectacle of everyone else learning their purse is heavier. A seller nearby announces a limited time offer, today only, for a potter whose previous master died. You blink. Did Rome invent the flash sale? The buyer next to you mutters, "That man's been today only for a week." You snicker softly. Joke too. But not every negotiation is lively. You pause beside a platform where an elderly woman stands quietly, her shoulders rounded. The seller calls out her skills, spinning wool, managing stores, gentle temperament, but the buyers walk past. They don't even ask the price. You feel the knot in your chest tighten. In Rome, age lowers value dramatically. Experience helps, but only if buyers think they can still get years of labor out of you. The seller whispers to her, "Don't worry, someone will need you." You can't tell if he believes it, or if it's just another backstage-style line repeated out of habit. Behind you, a loud argument breaks out. A buyer refuses to pay full price for a man with a scar on his leg, insisting it means he's prone to injury. The seller tries to spin it as evidence of past loyalty. The buyer snorts and counters with an offer so low the seller looks personally offended. Historians still argue whether scars increased or decreased value on average. Battle scars impressed some buyers but repelled others. You watch the two men haggle until the seller finally caves, muttering curses under his breath. The buyer struts away victorious. You think, "Congrats, you bullied a discount out of someone selling people." Joke 3, although it's the bitter kind. A group of wealthier buyers arrives next, flanked by servants carrying torches and scrolls. They discuss prices like investors comparing portfolios. One mentions paying 1,000 sesterces for a cook who specialized in Parthian dishes. Another brags about acquiring a tutor for twice that. "But worth every coin," he adds, with a self-satisfied sigh. Here, price isn't just cost, it's bragging rights. You wander toward the far end of the square, where cheaper sales take place. These are the quick turnovers, the don't look too closely deals. Prices here are lower, but the atmosphere feels more desperate. Sellers speak faster, buyers inspect less thoroughly, as though everyone hopes speed will blur the details. A man with a persistent cough sells for a fraction of what the Greek literate woman cost. A boy with a nervous twitch goes next, the seller loudly insisting, "He's not defective, just sensitive." One buyer asks a price and immediately winces. "That much? He's tiny." The seller fires back, "Small bodies eat less." You raise an eyebrow. Rome apparently loved a good cost-efficiency pitch. As you turn back toward the center of the market, the full system crystallizes in your mind. Prices aren't random. They're a formula. Age plus skills minus defects multiplied by bias, divided by desperation, adjusted for time of day and how persuasive the seller feels. A terrible algebra equation only Rome could love. You inhale deeply, the torches hiss, coins clink, voices sharpen, and you feel the weight of all those numbers layered onto human lives. This isn't just commerce, it's the empire's heartbeat, rhythmic, relentless, and cold. You drift toward the wealthier edge of the market, where the torch poles stand taller, the shadows fall softer, and the sandals crunching beside you cost more than your entire outfit. This is where the elite Romans shop, buyers with heavy purses, heavy expectations, and even heavier opinions. They don't browse, they curate. Every coin they spend must reflect their status, like choosing a new mosaic for the atrium or commissioning a pretentious poem that nobody actually wants to hear. A group of them stands in a loose semicircle, their togas shimmering faintly with a lavender sheen. You take one look and think, freshly laundered with imported saffron. Must be nice. Joke 1, gently delivered. Their posture is immaculate, chins lifted as if they're sniffing for bargains carried in on the breeze. They're not just shopping, they're performing for each other. After all, in Rome, where honor and reputation matter almost as much as surviving another Senate session, the way you spend money is part of your brand. One man gestures at a platform where a young woman stands with a placard listing educated in Greek, trained in domestic arts, excellent memory. The seller demonstrates her skill by instructing her to recite a poem. She does so flawlessly. The wealthy buyer nods approvingly. "A fine addition to my household," he murmurs to his companion, who replies, "My son needs a tutor. Perhaps she can manage both tasks." You hear the subtle bragging. Owning multi-skilled slaves is the ancient version of having the latest gadget that does everything except your taxes. A mainstream historical fact hovers into your mind. Elite Romans often bought slaves specifically for prestige. A literate slave, or one with musical talent, or one who knew secret culinary techniques from distant regions, elevated the entire household. You weren't just buying labour, you were buying cultural capital. Nothing impresses guests like a servant who can quote Euripides while mixing wine. You watch as one buyer steps closer to a platform holding a muscular man with the placard-trained porter, strong endurance. The buyer pokes the man's shoulder, testing for firmness like someone sizing up a melon. "Can he lift amphorae?" he asks. The seller beams. "3 at a time?" The buyer raises an eyebrow. "Full ones?" The seller hesitates for exactly one breath too long. The buyer sniffs. Transaction denied. Rome, where even lies must be well trained. Nearby, another wealthy buyer inspects a young boy with a quiet, frightened expression. "I need someone to help in the kitchen," the man says, "and perhaps to learn bookkeeping later." The seller nods enthusiastically, as if the boy is a piece of clay ready to mould. But the buyer isn't only looking at skills, he's calculating long-term value. The boy is small, healthy, unscarred, not cheap, but a good investment. Elite households think in decades. Your chest tightens when you realize the boy's entire life is being forecast like agricultural yield. You shift as a new entourage arrives. 2 elite women flanked by attendants carrying fans and small writing tablets. These women walk with the bored confidence of people who have bought many things and rarely regretted them. One pauses before a platform where a teenage girl stands. Eyes lowered. The woman studies her silently. You can feel the scrutiny, sharp as a blade. "Can she sew?" she finally asks. The seller assures her yes. "Can she sing?" "Like a bird," the seller says with a flourish. "A pigeon or a nightingale?" the woman asks dryly. Joke 2, hers this time. The seller insists nightingale, and the woman orders a demonstration. The girl sings softly, her voice trembling yet sweet. The elite woman nods, satisfied. "She'll do." You notice she never asked the price. When your purse is bottomless, numbers are merely suggestions. You wander further, drawn by the cluster forming around a platform where a middle-aged man stands with exceptionally straight posture. His placard boasts trained accountant, fluent in Latin and Greek, trustworthy. That last trait, trustworthy, is working overtime. You can practically smell the bidding war brewing. Elite buyers adore accountability and hate math, a timeless truth if there ever was one. One man claims, "My estates need reorganizing." Another counters, "My estates need reorganizing more." A quirky fringe tidbit surfaces. Some elite Romans purchased highly educated Greek slaves not just for teaching or accounting, but for conversation. Imagine buying someone because you're bored and need better dinner talk. Honestly, that's peak empire energy. You watch as 2 prospective buyers push toward the platform, each armed with a small entourage of advisors. One whispers, 15% too high. The other murmurs, raise by 20 to intimidate him. It's like watching a gladiatorial match, but with accountants. You lean in, curious who wins the bidding war, but the seller interrupts. "Gentlemen, please. He can serve only one household." Both buyers bristle. Rome's elite hate being told no. They finally agree to a bidding process so formal, it might as well require Senate approval. You move away quietly. The clinking of heavy coin purses seems to vibrate through the air, like metallic heartbeats. In this corner of the market, money doesn't just talk, it sings opera. A small commotion draws your attention. A seller is displaying a girl who seems unusually shy, her gaze darting everywhere except the crowd. The placard reads "Skilled domestic helper, obedient disposition." A wealthy matron approaches and asks, "Does she fear thunder? My villa is in the hills." The seller hesitates. Again, too long. The matron narrows her eyes. "I won't have someone screaming through every storm." The seller insists she doesn't fear thunder, while the girl flinches at the crackle of a nearby torch. You wince. Rome's buyers notice everything, except sometimes the obvious. Historians still argue whether wealthy buyers were more humane or simply more demanding. Some treated slaves with a paternalistic gentleness. Others enforced iron discipline behind marble walls. What you do know is this: elite buyers shape destinies profoundly. Their preferences ripple through the market, raising or lowering demand for certain skills, certain bodies, certain traits. A group of aristocratic men stroll past you, discussing their purchases as casually as trading wine recommendations. One brags about acquiring a cook who excels at Carthaginian dishes. Another boasts of a hairdresser who creates styles that make even senators jealous. The third proclaims, "I bought a steward last month who reorganized my entire estate. My profits doubled." They speak like proud collectors showing off rare finds. You can't help whispering, "Congratulations! You run your household like a hobby club." Joke 3, whispered into the thick night air. You step back, sensing the mood shift as a buyer dismisses a seller whose prices he deems insultingly low. Another waves a hand dramatically and says, "I'm not paying that for someone who can't even read Cicero." The seller blinks. "Sir, most Romans can't read Cicero," the buyer glares. Status is everything, facts are negotiable. As you leave this wealthy cluster behind, you feel the contrasting weights. Their purse is heavy, their decisions heavier still. Every coin they spend reshapes lives, choosing who becomes a tutor, who becomes a household servant, who becomes a prized asset, who becomes invisible. And you feel the narrative tug you onward, deeper into the machinery that prepares these purchases for the next stage of their lives. You follow the trail of recently purchased individuals moving away from the market square, their new masters leading them with quiet satisfaction or brisk impatience. The energy shifts the moment you step beyond the torch-lit platforms. The noise of bidding fades behind you, replaced by the creak of cartwheels, the soft shuffling of tired feet, and the subdued murmur of buyers giving instructions. You're heading toward the next phase of Rome's hidden machinery, the training warehouses where newly bought slaves are sorted, drilled, and shaped before entering their long-term assignments. The path curves behind a row of warehouses whose heavy wooden doors stand half open. Inside, torchlight spills across the stone floors, illuminating small groups of people who've arrived only minutes earlier. Their placards have been removed. Their oil-slicked cheeks are still shiny from the market's cosmetic touch-ups. The staged postures they spent hours practicing are now dissolving, shoulders slumping, feet fidgeting, hands unclenching. The performance is over. The onboarding begins. A man with a shaved head, clearly an overseer, steps forward, blowing a whistle carved from bone. "Line up," he commands. His voice echoes across the walls. You're struck by how similar this feels to the backstage area you visited earlier, yet entirely different. The backstage world was about polishing people for sale. This one is about grinding them into shape for work. A mainstream historical fact flickers in your memory. Many slaves were not taken directly into households or fields after purchase. Instead, they spent time in ergastula, training compounds or holding barracks used to discipline, organize, and instruct new laborers. Some ergastula were underground or semi-underground, built to prevent escape. The one you're standing in is above ground, but still carries the faint claustrophobia of confinement. You watch the overseer as he inspects each person, assigning categories with swift, impersonal efficiency: agricultural, domestic, household runner, kitchen, general labor. His tone doesn't vary. It's like he's sorting laundry, though laundry doesn't look back at you with hollow eyes. A young woman stands very still as he circles her. "Domestic," he says finally. The woman exhales shakily. She probably knows domestic service is safer than the mines, the quarries, the fields. Not easy, never easy, but better. You feel a small, guilty flutter of relief on her behalf. Nearby, a man is told he'll be trained for field work. He nods numbly. Another is assigned to the stables. A boy, far too young you think, is assigned to run errands. You hope his legs hold out. A quirky fringed tidbit floats into your thoughts. Some training warehouses used musical rhythms, simple drum patterns to teach work pacing. It helped synchronize group tasks and allowed overseers to detect laggers or runaways. Looking around, you half expect to hear a drumbeat begin. Instead, you hear grumbling. "Again," one overseer complains to another, "you keep giving me the ones with bad attitudes." The second overseer winks. Character building. You roll your eyes. Joke 1. You watch as the newly purchased group is separated into rows. The overseer lifts a long pointer stick, tapping each person's shoulders, arms, back, legs, testing for posture and balance. Then he demonstrates how they are expected to stand when addressing a master. Back straight, chin level, eyes lowered unless asked, he recites. No slouching, no fidgeting, no chewing on anything. He points at one man who looks guilty. Especially not your own nails. The man mutters, "They're my nails," but the overseer snaps back, "Not anymore." You feel your stomach drop. Joke 2 tries to form in your throat and dies halfway. You drift toward the back of the warehouse, where a smaller group is learning household tasks. A woman demonstrates how to fold linens with crisp, flawless corners. Another teaches a young man how to pour wine without dribbling a drop. "Remember," she says, "you tilt the crater before you tilt the jug. Otherwise your master becomes very angry and very stained." She sighs deeply, as if she's personally scrubbed out too many tunics belonging to furious Romans. Then you see another corner of the warehouse, a makeshift classroom. A slave-turned instructor sits before a tablet teaching newly purchased individuals how to recognize Roman numerals. "This is 1, he says, drawing a simple line. "This is 5, he draws V. "This is 10. You notice the learners nodding earnestly, intimidated by symbols that will soon control every aspect of their labor. Historians still argue whether literacy training was common in such warehouses or limited to households that demanded it. Watching this scene, you suspect the answer varies with location and budget, like everything else in Rome. You linger near another training group where an older woman is instructing newcomers on etiquette, how to speak softly, how to address different ranks in a household, how to move without drawing attention. "Do not contradict the master," she says, pacing back and forth. "Do not contradict the mistress. Do not contradict the guests. Actually," she stops, sighs, and gestures in a vague circle. "Just assume everyone outranks you." You can't help murmuring, "Well, that's efficient." Joke 3 tucked neatly into the moment, but it's not all instruction. You catch glimpses of exhaustion, the trembling of tired legs, the slump of overworked backs, the glazed look of individuals overwhelmed by too much change in too little time. Some lean discreetly against walls. Others stare straight ahead, trying not to think of the life they left behind or the one they're heading toward. These warehouses aren't cruel in the way the mines or quarries are cruel, but they crack people differently, slowly, methodically. One overseer notices a man struggling to maintain his stance. "First day?" he asks, not unkindly. The man nods. "You'll adjust," the overseer says. Everyone does. You hope he's right, but your heart whispers something else. A pair of overseers argue in the corner about allocation. "I need another stable hand," one insists. "Then request one from the next shipment," the other snaps. "This group is already sorted." "But what about him?" the first asks, pointing at a man with strong arms. The other shakes his head. "Bought by a merchant, going to a warehouse in Trastevere." Their voices fade as they walk away, leaving the man standing quietly, uncertain where he truly belongs. The torches begin burning low, shadows stretch long over the training floor. Newcomers are herded into sleeping quarters, simple mats on stone, barely enough space to lie down. The door closes with a heavy thud. As you stand in the dimming light, watching the daily machinery of Rome mold people into instruments of labor, you feel the pull of the story deepening. This isn't the dramatic spectacle of the market. It's the quieter, colder stage where futures are shaped by repetition, discipline, and dwindling hope. You inhale slowly, letting the torch smoke coil through your lungs. You're ready to step deeper still. You leave the training warehouse behind, its echoing commands still rattling faintly in your ears. The path ahead widens, dotted with lamps and the faint hum of late-night chatter. You're drifting now toward a quieter but more prestigious corner of Rome's slave economy, one where the spotlight shifts from broad-shouldered laborers to minds, talents, and rare abilities. Tonight you're stepping into the world of specialists for sale, the individuals whose skills ignite bidding wars and whose price tags could buy a small villa in the countryside. The first platform you approach is noticeably different. No sawdust on the ground, no frantic sellers waving their arms, no discount haggling. Instead, there's a soft murmur of anticipation, the kind you hear at art auctions where everyone is pretending to be calm while their coin purses vibrate with anxiety. A man in a simple tunic stands on the platform. His placard reads, "Scribe, trained in Greek and Latin, excellent penmanship." You can practically feel the buyers salivating. In Rome, literacy, Especially bilingual literacy is a luxury. A household with its own scribe, that's a flex. One buyer steps forward, inspecting the man's hands. "Steady grip," he mutters approvingly. Another demands a sample. The seller hands the scribe a stylus, and the man writes a flawless line on a wax tablet. Smooth curves, perfect spacing. You feel underqualified just watching him. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Educated Greek slaves, especially scribes and tutors, were among the most valuable enslaved people in Rome. They shaped the minds of elite children, maintained household ledgers, and sometimes even advised their masters on poetry or philosophy. To Roman elites, owning an educated person wasn't just practical, it was fashionable. You move to the next platform where a middle-aged woman demonstrates textile artistry. She holds up a patterned cloth so intricate you blink twice, wondering how human fingers could create something that detailed. Her placard, "Weaver, embroidery specialist." A wealthy matron gasps softly. "This would elevate my entire household," she whispers, sounding like someone who's just discovered scented candles for the first time. Joke 1, light and a little too accurate. A boy beside you nudges his friend. "My mother would sell me for that cloth," he murmurs. The friend nods solemnly. "She almost did last year." They both grin. Clearly Roman humour hits different. But you know talent comes in many forms. You drift farther toward a circle of buyers clustered around a man demonstrating carpentry skills. He fits joints into place with confident ease, assembles a wooden frame in moments, then disassembles it just as smoothly. The buyers murmur appreciatively. Craftsmanship like this saves households money and increases property value. One man whispers, "My villa gate has been squeaking for months. This one could fix it." Another replies, "Yes, but can he fix your marriage?" The first man glares. Joke 2. A seller proudly announces he built entire outbuildings for his former master. You notice he doesn't mention whether the former master is alive, but the buyers don't ask. The man's hands speak for themselves, strong, sure, capable. You wonder if he will be assigned to a peaceful workshop or a grueling construction site. Skills increase value, but they don't guarantee comfort. A platform to your left catches your attention. On it stands a young man tuning a lyre. He plucks a gentle melody, and even the torches seem to sway. His placard reads, "Musician, trained performer." Rome loves music, especially at dinner parties where elites compete for the most impressive entertainment. A buyer approaches and asks, "Can he sing?" The seller beams. "Like Orpheus." The musician sings. "He does not sound like Orpheus." You murmur, "More like Orpheus." Joke 3. Still, the crowd applauds politely. Skill is skill, even when oversold. You step closer to another scene, this one quieter, but somehow more intense. A man in his early 30s stands beside a table scattered with wax tablets. His placard reads, "Accountant, precise calculations, trustworthy." You immediately know this one is going to cost somebody a fortune. Wealthy Romans hate bookkeeping about as much as they hate weak wine, and a reliable accountant can prevent disastrous financial blunders, like accidentally buying a third villa when you meant to buy a mule. The seller hands the accountant a complex problem. You watch him work, silently, stylus moving with careful strokes. He finishes in moments. Two buyers gape. "He's faster than my nephew," one says. "Everyone is faster than your nephew," the other replies. Their attendants nod emphatically. A fringe tidbit pops into your mind. Some elite households purchased mathematicians and astrologers specifically for analysing omens, or planning auspicious dates for public events. Imagine buying someone whose entire job is telling you when not to leave your house. Rome truly invented personalised consulting. The platform next to you features a tutor, a grey-haired Greek man with eyes sharp enough to slice through marble. He stands calmly as buyers pepper him with questions. What poets do you prefer? How do you teach rhetoric? Can you train a 10-year-old boy to stop slouching? The tutor answers smoothly, confidently. One man asks him to recite Homer. The tutor obliges with a verse so beautifully delivered that even you feel smarter just listening. But then something subtle shifts. A buyer asks, "Has he ever challenged a master's authority?" The tutor hesitates. Just a flicker, but there. Historians still argue whether elite Romans feared highly educated slaves because intellect can foster rebellion, or whether they valued cleverness too much to worry. The hesitation reminds you that brilliance is both a blessing and a risk in this world. You drift on, watching a potter shape clay, an herbalist identify dried plants by smell alone, and a cook preparing a small dish whose aroma makes your stomach rumble. The cook's placard reads, "Trained in Parthian recipes." A buyer inhales deeply and whispers, "I will pay anything." You lean close and mutter, "That's the smell of negotiation failure." Joke 4, bonus round. The cook plates the dish, and buyers crowd around like pigeons around spilled grain. You step aside before someone elbows you in the ribs. As you near the edge of the specialist stalls, a seller proudly announces, "Behold, a trained gladiator." You blink. He's a specialist, sure, but also a walking red flag. The crowd murmurs uneasily. Gladiators are valuable but dangerous. One buyer whispers, "I could use him as a bodyguard." Another counters, "You could also end up stabbed." The seller interjects, "Only if you treat him poorly." Everyone laughs, but nobody buys him. Yet. The night deepens, the torches sputter. The bidding for specialists becomes slower, more deliberate, like people savouring the final courses of a decadent feast. These individuals, with their unique skills and rare talents, will soon be scattered across Rome, teaching children, writing contracts, managing estates, crafting tools, cooking feasts, composing melodies. As you watch the last transaction wrap up, your mind lingers on one thought. Skill changes fate here. It doesn't erase captivity, but it reshapes the path, and you feel the story nudging you onward, toward the network of supply routes that fill these platforms day after day. You drift away from the soft glow of the specialist platforms, feeling the night air cool against your skin as the market's noise settles into a distant hum. The crowd thins, the torches sputter, and you're drawn toward the edges of the square where traders huddle beside wagons stacked with ropes, ledgers, and travel-worn bundles. If the auction platforms are the beating heart of Rome's slave market, then this outer ring is its bloodstream, where lives flow in from every direction across the empire. Tonight you're following those currents, tracing the supply routes from provinces to Rome, where conquest, piracy, and opportunity funnel human beings into the capital's insatiable demand. You pause beside a cart whose wheels are coated in dried mud the colour of iron. Two traders are arguing quietly in a dialect you can't place. Maybe Thracian, maybe something from farther inland. One points toward the market, saying, "They want fresh stock by morning." The other groans and replies, "Fresh? We've marched for days. They're lucky anyone can still stand." You glimpse inside the cart and see blankets rumpled from long travel, the faint outline of shackles hanging from a beam. Your spine tingles. It's one thing to see people on platforms, it's another to see the long road that brought them here. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Most slaves in Rome were acquired through war. Conquest was the empire's fastest recruitment strategy. Defeat a province, round up prisoners, ship them south. Gauls, Thracians, Germans, Syrians, Jews, Egyptians. Rome's reach was long, and its appetite relentless. The roads carved by Roman engineers didn't just carry soldiers and merchants, they carried captives. You wander between wagons and overhear another conversation. A trader boasts, "My last shipment came from Britannia. Took months, storms every week, lost 2 men overboard, and 1 donkey." His companion gasps, "The donkey?" "Yes," the trader sighs, "my favourite one." Joke 1 lands lightly in the dark, the absurd priorities of empire laid bare. But not all supply lines involve marching armies. You move toward a cluster of sailors loading cargo off a river barge. Their faces are windburned, their tunics stiff with salt. One man ties off a rope while muttering, "Pirates again near Cilicia. They're stealing from us now." Another sailor snorts, "Stealing? We're competing brands." You blink at that. Joke 2, gritty, uncomfortable, and yet somehow fitting. A fringe tidbit whispers into your mind. For centuries, piracy in the Mediterranean wasn't just tolerated, it flourished because it fed slave markets. Pirates raided coastal towns, captured travellers, and sold them to brokers who then transported them to major ports. Some Roman elites even bought directly from pirates, pretending not to notice the moral swamp they were wading through. Historians still argue whether Rome turned a blind eye to piracy because it benefited from the supply chain. Based on the smug faces of the traders you're watching right now, you'd bet a few denarii on yes. You continue through the rows of wagons. A group of recently arrived captives sits under a makeshift shelter, wrapped in thin blankets. Their expressions vary: fatigue, fear, resignation, confusion. A woman from what looks like a Syrian caravan traces patterns in the dust with her fingertip, perhaps writing a prayer. A Thracian man stares into the distance, jaw clenched, eyes dim. A boy from Gaul glances up as you pass, his gaze sharp but trembling. You want to say something comforting, but words feel useless here. You overhear a trader telling a buyer, "This group came from the Danube frontier. Tough fighters, the lot of them." The buyer frowns. "Fight? I need farmers?" The trader waves dismissively. "They learn. Put a plough in anyone's hands long enough, they learn," you whisper under your breath. Some customer service training might also help. Joke 3. Delivered quietly to the night. To your right, a team of exhausted oxen pulls a wagon creaking under the weight of supplies. Chains, wool cloaks, clay jars of water, bundles of coarse bread. These caravans travel for weeks, sometimes months, and the journey itself shapes the people inside. Some arrive sick, some arrive strong, some arrive numb. A trader nearby unwraps a cloth bundle to reveal herbal salves. "Use these to keep them healthy," he says proudly. A buyer raises an eyebrow. "Healthy? That one is limping." The trader winces. "Healthy-ish." You drift toward another group where brokers record inventory on wax tablets. 14 from Cappadocia, one says, scratching lines into the wax. 3 from Numidia, 1 from Achaia. Educated. His partner whistles. Educated fetches double. Triple, the first corrects. Unless he talks back, then half. They laugh. Rome thrives on this kind of transactional banter, morbid but functional. You overhear a different trader talking with surprising softness. "They were temple servants," he says, nodding toward a group of quiet-robed individuals, captured during the rebellion. A buyer asks, "Do they obey?" The trader shrugs. "They have discipline. Ritual teaches discipline." The buyer nods, satisfied. You feel a twist in your stomach. The path from sacred duty to forced labour takes only a few strokes of political change. At the far edge of the square, you notice a group of chained men from Germania. Their height, their pale hair, their broad frames draw immediate stares. A buyer walks past and murmurs, "They'd make excellent guards." Another counters, "Or rebels." The first shrugs. Depends who trains them. The fragile line between usefulness and threat is everywhere here. Drawn, erased, redrawn in every conversation. A fringe fact flickers. Some slaves came, willingly, or semi-willingly, sold by families during famine or debt. Not common, but not unheard of. You glance at the traders and wonder which of the people around you lost battles, and which lost everything else. A mule brays loudly beside you, startling a trader who spills a handful of coins. He curses, kneels to gather them and mutters, "These roads will be the death of me." You resist the urge to tell him that the roads are the least deadly part of this business. You begin piecing together the broader picture. The Empire's supply routes form a vast web stretching from the Scottish Highlands to the deserts of Egypt, from Iberian mines to Syrian caravanserais, from Greek ports to Alpine passes. War creates captives, piracy fills galleys, debt fuels transactions, politics greases the gears, and every road, no matter how winding, leads here, to the torchlit platforms where the city consumes its human fuel. As you step back into the main square, you hear the distant sound of another caravan arriving. A low rumble, a rhythmic clatter, a tired shout. Another thread pulling into Rome's centre, another set of lives rerouted. The city inhales, the machine keeps running, and you feel it tug you deeper toward the unspoken fears that haunt these transactions. You move back toward the centre of the market, but the atmosphere feels different now. Charged, brittle, restless. The night deepens, the torches hiss, and every flicker of flame seems to carve sharper edges onto the faces around you. Buyers purse their lips. Sellers shift their weight. Enslaved people stand a little straighter, as if sensing that vigilance here isn't optional, it's survival. And drifting through the crowd like cold draughts whispering under the doors of a quiet house are fear and rumours, the kind that make Rome's slave market feel less like a marketplace and more like a powder keg waiting for one stray spark. You slow your pace as the conversations around you change tone. Gone are the confident price negotiations, the casual boasts about household upgrades. What you're hearing now is the low, uneasy murmur of people trying not to sound scared, but absolutely sounding scared. A man near you whispers, "Did you hear about the runaway last week near Tiber?" His companion flinches. They found the master tied up with his own belt. The first man nods gravely, though the flicker of intrigue in his eyes says he might be exaggerating. Historians still argue whether many of these runaway stories were true or just elite paranoia echoing through the marble halls of Rome. But the anxiety they create? That part is very real. You wander closer to a group gathered around a nervous seller. He's gripping his placard as if it might shield him from criticism. "They're loyal," he insists. "This group hasn't caused any trouble." A buyer smirks. "Hasn't caused trouble yet." The seller winces. Fear isn't good for business, neither are rumours. A mainstream historical fact flickers in your mind. Rome lived in the long shadow of Spartacus. His rebellion had been crushed generations earlier, but its memory was etched into the psyche of every Roman with money, property, or a household full of slaves. The uprising had been massive, tens of thousands of rebels marching across Italy, terrifying the elite. And though it ended in crucifixions along the Appian Way, the fear never really left. Tonight you can feel that ghost walking beside you. Someone behind you mutters, "Revolt begins with 2, then grows to 10. Another adds, "And then 100. A third whispers, "And then they burn the villas." You're pretty sure none of them have seen a revolt firsthand, but rumour in Rome spreads faster than amphorae of cheap wine. A quirky fringe tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some masters required slaves to wear matching clothing specifically so they could identify runaways at a glance. Imagine enforcing a dress code as a security system. Rome's version of corporate branding, but with shackles. You pause near a platform where a woman stands trembling under torchlight. A buyer narrows his eyes and asks, "Does she fear thunder?" The seller stammers, "Only a little." "Thunder makes people unpredictable," the buyer says. "I don't want fear in my household." You almost want to tell him he's in the wrong city then. Rome practically brews thunderstorms of anxiety on a weekly basis. Another cluster of buyers debates the best way to prevent runaways. "Mark them," one suggests. "Restrict movement," another counters. A third says, "Fear works best." The first man scoffs. "Fear creates rebellion." You lean in and whisper, "Congratulations, you've discovered basic psychology." Joke 1. Dry enough to fit Rome's dust. But the fears here aren't only about runaways. You overhear a chilling rumour spreading like wildfire. They say a group coming in from the frontier fought back against their guards. Another adds, "Killed one of them." A seller hisses at them, "Stop scaring the buyers." But the rumour has already slipped into the crowd like smoke. A buyer near you mutters, "First Spartacus, then Sicily, now this. The gods are warning us." His friend replies, "The gods are busy. This is just bad management." Joke 2, delivered by Rome itself. You step aside as a veteran trader marches through, puffing with self-importance. "Nonsense," he barks. "Revolts are rare. This market is stable." But his eyes dart left and right, betraying his own unease. Fear makes even experienced men jittery. You wander toward the back row of platforms where the cheaper, more desperate sales take place. Here, rumours don't just circulate, they multiply. One seller warns a buyer, "Don't purchase that man. He was part of the rebellion near Capua." The buyer pales. The enslaved man shouts, "That's a lie." The seller shrugs. "Prove it." You blink. Rome's rumour economy is clearly booming. Someone tugs your sleeve. A boy, barely 15, whispers, "Some say the gods watch the markets and punish cruelty." You nod gently. He continues, "But others say the gods don't see us at all." His voice shakes. You murmur, "If they don't see you, it's their loss." Joke 3. Soft, warm, and meant only for him. You drift past another platform where a buyer argues loudly with the seller. "You expect me to pay full price for someone who might stab me?" The seller throws up his hands. "Everyone might stab you, sir. That's life." A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd. Rome is nothing if not self-aware. Across the square, a trio of elite women whispers nervously. One clutches her cloak tighter. "I heard a story," she says dramatically, "of a slave who poisoned an entire household." Her friend gasps, "What happened?" The woman leans in. "They all died." The friend asks, "Even the dog?" The storyteller sighs, especially the dog. Whether true or not, the dog detail hits hardest. You begin to notice that fear in this market isn't symmetrical. Buyers fear rebellion, sellers fear low prices, enslaved people fear everything. Being sold, not. Being sold, being noticed, being overlooked, being assigned to a cruel household, being assigned to a dangerous job. Every rumour lands differently depending on whose future it threatens. As you turn back toward the platform rows, you hear one last whisper float through the air like a shiver made audible. They say a storm is coming tomorrow. Storms bring bad omens. Someone responds, storms bring higher prices. No one wants to travel in rain. You sigh. Even fear gets monetized here. The torch nearest you pops loudly, showering sparks that vanish before they reach the ground. The square seems to inhale again, heavy with unease, and you feel the narrative pulling you toward the next chapter. Not the buying or selling, not the rumours or the fears, but the reality that begins after purchase, when the market fades and the daily grind begins. You drift away from the market's last murmurs, its torches shrinking behind you, until they become flickering orange freckles in the night. The street ahead is quieter, lined with shuttered taverns and the muted pulse of Rome settling into sleep. You follow the footsteps of a small group led by a merchant and his wife, the couple who purchased a young man just moments ago. It's time now to witness daily life after purchase, the way a person's world contracts into new routines, expectations and hierarchies, the moment the bidding stops. You trail the group through narrow alleys until the merchant's domus appears, a modest but comfortable house with a painted facade and a wooden door that creaks like it judges everyone who enters. Inside, the atrium glows with lamplight. Water ripples gently in the central pool, sending shimmering patterns across the walls. The air smells faintly of rosemary and old plaster. It's peaceful, almost reassuring, until you notice how the young man's shoulders tense the moment he steps inside. A new home isn't always a safe home. A household steward approaches, a wiry, sharp-eyed older man whose tunic is crisp enough to imply authority without needing to say a word. "Name?" he asks the newly purchased young man. The seller never mentioned the man's name, and the merchant doesn't care. The steward waits. The young man whispers it. The steward nods once. "You will keep it," he says simply, which is actually a good sign. Some households rename slaves the way people rename pets. This one shows at least a sliver of restraint. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind. Roman domestic slaves formed the backbone of household operations. They cooked, cleaned, fetched water, dressed children, lit fires, managed stores, tended gardens, and sometimes slept in corners of hallways or tiny side rooms carved out of architecture like afterthoughts. Their work was constant, repetitive, invisible. The house might sleep, but they rarely did. The steward gestures for the young man to follow. You follow too, drifting like a quiet shadow. He leads him into a small room with a straw mattress, a folded blanket, and a clay jug of water. "Your sleeping place," the steward says. "Wake before dawn, quiet steps, no errors." He doesn't smile, but he doesn't sneer either. His tone is that of a man who knows a smooth-running household depends on discipline. You watch the young man sit on the edge of the mattress, testing its scratchiness. He exhales, long, shaky. You can almost feel the weight settling onto his spine, the invisible shift from person being displayed to person being used. You step back to give him a moment he doesn't truly get to have. Back in the kitchen, the merchant's wife is already outlining tomorrow's tasks. "Sweep the atrium first," she instructs another slave. "Then help prepare the morning meal, and make sure the lamps are cleaned. The soot marks the walls." She says this as though the walls personally insult her every time they get dirty. The kitchen itself is a burst of heat and sound. Clay pots simmer over a low flame. A young boy grinds herbs with a mortar, the rhythmic scrape blending with the crackle of oil. One woman cleans knives. Another stirs a porridge so thick it could probably be used as building material. The new arrival stands in the doorway, absorbing everything at once. Smells, sounds, expectations. A quirky fringe tidbit emerges. Some Roman households assigned a slave specifically to maintain the kitchen fire overnight so the embers never died. You glance at the hearth glowing stubbornly in the corner and wonder whose shift it is tonight. Whoever it is, They're probably already calculating how many times they'll have to poke the coals before dawn. The steward introduces the new young man to the kitchen crew. He'll help with water fetching, cleaning, carrying, he announces. A practical beginning. Water fetching alone is brutal, lugging heavy amphorae from public fountains multiple times a day. One woman nods politely at him. Another eyes him skeptically, sizing up whether he'll slow them down. Someone hands him a cloth and instructs him to wipe the counters. It's a simple task, but you see the tremor in his hand, not fear, exhaustion. The market, the travel, the uncertainty. It's a lot to carry into a kitchen full of bubbling pots and sharp knives. As he works, you drift toward the rear courtyard where two stable slaves prepare the animals for night. One brushes a mule. The mule flicks its tail in a slow, unimpressed arc. He kicks if you stand behind him, one stable slave warns the other. He kicks if you stand in front of him, the other replies. Joke 1, courtesy of the mule department. You notice how each slave here specializes in some small, repeating task. That's the rhythm of a Roman household, predictability wrapped around controlled chaos. Everyone knows their place, and stepping outside it, even accidentally, can lead to punishment. A mainstream household detail comes to mind. Many elite homes used bell-like clappers or snapped fingers to summon slaves. The sound could echo through the halls at any hour. You imagine how that must feel, sleep interrupted by the crisp call of duty, dreams dissolving into commands. You step back inside, where the new young man now helps extinguish lamps in the hallway. The steward stands behind him, observing. Lower, slower, he instructs. Don't spill the oil. The young man adjusts his technique, careful and tense. The steward nods. Good, you learn quickly. For a moment, something like encouragement flickers between them. Not kindness exactly, just practicality wrapped in human warmth, the kind that slips out when no one's watching too hard. A group of household slaves gathers briefly in the corridor to exchange tired looks and soft whispers. You catch fragments. Long day. New boy seems quiet. Mistress wants the floor polished again tomorrow. Of course she does. One woman rubs her temples and mutters, at least no surprise dinner guest tonight. Another groans. Don't say that. You'll summon them. Joke 2, whispered Superstition. You follow the young man as he's shown how to operate the heavy wooden shutters that control airflow in the atrium. The steward demonstrates once, twice, then makes him practice. If guests visit, the steward says, you open them quickly, gracefully, no struggling. The young man nods, though the shutters look like they require the strength of 3 grown bears. When the house finally settles, the slaves begin their quiet end-of-day routines. Some massage sore shoulders. Others whisper a few lines of prayer to household gods. One older woman lights a tiny pinch of incense and murmurs a blessing for strength. You watch the young man return to his mattress. He lies down slowly, staring at the ceiling beams. Tomorrow will be his first full day here. The thought weighs on him, but you also see a flicker of determination in his eyes. Surviving a Roman household requires that. Before slipping out, you catch a muffled conversation between 2 older slaves. He seems decent, one whispers, referring to the young man. Maybe, the other replies. Let's hope the master is too. He's better than some, worse than others. Isn't that always the way? Joke 3 lives in the weary truth of that line. As you step back into the cool night outside the domus, you feel the shift again. The story pulling you toward the harsher, more punishing realities of Roman discipline. Daily life may start gently here, but Rome rarely stays gentle for long. The household sleeps, or at least pretends to. Lamps dim, voices fade, and the domus falls into that fragile silence where even the walls seem to exhale. But you know better than to mistake quiet for peace. In Rome, calm is often just the pause before the next demand. And as you drift back through the corridors, following the soft footsteps of the steward on his early morning rounds, you feel the shift into a darker, more precarious part of this life. The punishments and tightropes that enslaved people must navigate every single day. Dawn hasn't fully cracked yet. The young man you've been following sits up from his straw mattress, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He's barely rested, but the steward taps the doorframe and says simply, "Up." No good morning, no gentle easing into the day. Rome doesn't offer warm wake-up calls. You trail him back to the kitchen, where others are already working. A woman grinds herbs with stiff fingers. A boy sweeps the floor, blinking rapidly to stay awake. A pot of barley porridge bubbles with resentful determination. The household may look calm, but the anxiety underneath hums like a low string on a lyre. You know a mainstream historical fact. Roman punishments for enslaved people varied wildly depending on the household. Some masters preferred verbal reprimands or additional chores. Others employed whips, shackles, starvation, isolation, branding. The law gave them immense authority, and not everyone wields power wisely. But here, today, you're about to see something that sits in the middle of that spectrum. Corrective, harsh, but not the worst Rome offered. The steward inspects the kitchen and pauses in front of a tall young woman stirring a pot. "The mistress said yesterday's stew was too salty," he says. The woman lowers her head. "Apologies," she murmurs. The steward nods once, then adds, "Extra floor duty today?" Her shoulders fall. "It could have been much worse." She murmurs, "Thank you." That phrase hits you like a stone dropped into cold water, thanking someone for a lighter punishment. This is the tightrope, constantly negotiating survival. As the morning unfolds, you drift into the courtyard where two stable slaves prepare the animals. One mule refuses to cooperate. Surprise, surprise. The slave tugs the rope gently, coaxing it toward the trough, but the mule digs its heels in, snorts aggressively, and then steps squarely on the man's foot. He yelps. His partner sighs. Not again. Joke 1. Courtesy of Rome's most dramatic mule. The steward strides over. Problem? The stable slave shakes his head quickly, hiding the pain. No, sir, just stubborn. The steward eyes the mule, then the man, then shrugs. Fix it. He doesn't ask if the man's foot is broken. He doesn't care. The work matters more than the worker. Another quiet rule carved into the bones of the system. Inside, the merchant's wife wanders through the atrium giving directions before breakfast. "You," she says, pointing at the new young man, "polish the bronze lamps." He nods. She steps closer. "Last night I found dust on the windowsill. I do not want to find dust today." Her tone is mild but razor-edged. He bows slightly. "Yes, mistress." You can feel the invisible blade he has to balance. On. One mistake too many. One wrong angle of deference, and consequences sharp and fast. As he works, another slave, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, leans over and whispers, "Always say yes, even when she's wrong, especially when she's wrong." His attempt at humour is thin but real. Joke 2, wrapped in survival advice. Later, in the small storage room where tools hang from hooks, you see the items that enforce discipline. A short whip, a wooden rod, a pair of iron shackles, and a set of ropes braided tightly. They're not displayed with pride, they're hung like any other tool. Brooms, buckets, knives, and somehow that makes them more unsettling. They're not symbols, they're equipment. A quirky fringe tidbit floats up. Some Roman households use the cullius method, stuffing someone into a sack with animals, for extreme punishments, though that was usually reserved for specific crimes like parricide, not typical discipline. Still, the fact that such an idea even existed in the same culture that built aqueducts and invented underfloor heating reminds you Rome was a very both things can be true kind of civilization. You step into the peristyle garden, where a teenage girl kneels by the fountain scrubbing mosaic tiles. Her hands are raw, red, trembling slightly. You overhear two older slaves whispering nearby. "She dropped a cup yesterday." Accident? Of course, but the mistress liked that cup. The girl's punishment isn't brutal, but it's punishing. Scrubbing tiles for hours is its own form of suffering. You watch her rub at a stubborn stain as though scrubbing the world back into her control. The steward calls the household together before midday tasks begin. "Listen carefully," he says. "Master wants everything perfect for guests tonight." A ripple of dread spreads through the group. Guests mean extra work, more scrutiny, more opportunities for mistakes. You feel the tension twist the air tight around you. He continues, "No errors. Mistress is already anxious. Keep your heads down, move quickly, stay silent unless spoken to." The list feels endless, like balancing 20 spinning plates on one trembling fingertip. Later, the new young man accidentally drops a bronze lamp. It clatters loudly on the marble floor but doesn't break. You freeze. He freezes. Everyone freezes. The steward walks over slowly, arms folded. You can hear the young man's heartbeat from across the room. The steward leans down, picks up the lamp, examines it, and finally says, "You're lucky." He hands it back. "Do it again and you'll polish the courtyard stones for a week." The young man nods quickly. His breath comes out sharp and shaking. As the day wears on, you begin to notice something crucial. Punishment isn't always physical. Often it's loss of trust, loss of small privileges, being reassigned to harsher tasks, being isolated, being criticized in ways designed to break confidence, and perhaps, the most painful of all, watching kindness withheld. But amidst all this, you catch glimpses of resistance, not rebellion, not defiance, but subtle, quiet strategies enslaved people use to safeguard their dignity. One slave hums softly while working, letting the tune soothe her nerves. Another cracks a joke under his breath to make a co-worker smile. One shares a small piece of bread with the new young man. Another helps correct his grip on a broom so he won't be scolded later. These moments are small, almost invisible, but they matter. They're the tightropes walked daily, finding ways to exist, endure, and persist without provoking the system designed to confine them. Near dusk, the steward inspects the household again. He pauses at the young man, who has worked non-stop since dawn. "Good," he says quietly. "Keep learning." It's almost a compliment, almost. But in this world, almost can feel like sunlight breaking through clouds. As you step back toward the doorway, the evening breeze carrying the scent of herbs and cooling stone, you realize that life here is a constant balancing act, not just between obedience and exhaustion, but between survival and selfhood. And the story now draws you toward the moments where skill, pride, and unexpected opportunities begin to reshape these fragile lives. The household settles into the soft hum of evening preparations, brooms whispering over tile, pots clinking in the kitchen, sandals brushing across marble with the familiar rhythm of practiced routine. But tonight you feel a subtle shift in the air. Not all labour here is drudgery. Some of it, surprisingly, almost defiantly, becomes an arena where enslaved people carve out small pockets of dignity. As you follow the young man back into the heart of the domus, you begin to witness moments of skill and pride, the rare but vital spaces where competence becomes its own quiet power. The atrium glows with lamplight, and the steward walks the perimeter with sharp, assessing eyes. "Prepare for guests," he says, and quickly. The household springs into motion. You watch the older woman assigned to textiles smooth the mistress's favourite tablecloth over a long dining couch. Her movements are graceful, the cloth falling perfectly into place on the first try. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Households often relied on highly skilled enslaved workers to maintain the appearance of elite prosperity, cooking elaborate meals, arranging decor, even acting as the household's public face when visitors arrived. The textile woman catches you watching and gives the faintest hint of a proud smile. She knows she's good at her craft. She knows the household depends on it. In the kitchen, the cook, a broad-shouldered man with a razor-sharp focus, prepares a stew so fragrant you momentarily forget the darkness of tonight's topic. He sprinkles herbs with a flourish, tastes the broth, nods with satisfaction. "Too much cumin," he mutters, then adds more anyway. You bite back a grin. Joke one found its moment. Two younger assistants hover beside him, watching closely as he demonstrates the proper way to slice leeks. "Not too thin," he instructs. "Not too thick. You're not feeding goats." One assistant giggles and immediately slices a piece way too thick. The cook gives him a look that could curdle milk. "Apologies," the assistant squeaks. The cook shakes his head, half annoyed, half amused. You drift toward the back courtyard where an elderly enslaved man sits at a small table with wax tablets. He's the household's unofficial accountant, a role he clearly takes seriously. His stylus dances across the wax as he tallies grain stores, wine rations, and market expenses. The steward approaches and hands him a small wooden token. "Master bought olives today," the steward says. "Add it." The accountant nods and adjusts his figures with swift precision. A buyer from the previous night once boasted that a good accountant doubles your wealth. Whether true or exaggerated, it's clear this man's expertise elevates him within the household. Not to freedom, not to comfort, but to respect. And in this world, respect is a currency. A quirky fringe tidbit floats into your mind. some enslaved estate. Managers, called villachi, ran entire farming operations overseeing workers, resources, and profits. Though they held enormous responsibility, they were still enslaved. Imagine running a business flawlessly while knowing you have no legal control over your own life. A contradiction Rome never bothered to resolve. As you walk deeper into the house, you hear faint laughter coming from the study. You peek inside. A teenage girl from the household staff is helping the merchant's son with his handwriting. The boy groans dramatically. "My wrist hurts." The girl arches an eyebrow. "Your wrist hurts because you hold the stylus like you're strangling it." Joke 2, she delivered it flawlessly. The boy's mother enters, sees the girl's patient teaching, and nods approvingly. "She's better with him than the last tutor," she murmurs. You catch the girl's small glow of pride, quickly hidden behind lowered eyes. Farther down the hall, the new young man, the one you followed since the market, is helping the steward rearrange chairs for the evening meal. The steward hands him a heavy bronze bowl. "Polish," he says. The young man takes a breath and begins working carefully, rubbing with steady circular motions. When he lifts the bowl to the light, the metal gleams. "Good," the steward says. A single word, barely warm, but the young man straightens his spine slightly, as if that one syllable stitched a tiny patch of strength into him. You watch him work for a while, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. Pride isn't forbidden here. It's just dangerous. Too much confidence invites punishment. Too little ambition invites scorn. So the enslaved people in this household walk a razor-thin line, finding meaning in work done well, in competence that can't be taken from them. Later, you step into the tiny storage room where a middle-aged woman arranges jars of herbs, oils, and spices. Her organization system is immaculate, labeled, categorized, neatly stacked. Another slave steps inside and says admiringly, "No one else could run this room." She smirks slightly. "That's why I run it." Joke 3. Dry and efficient. Even the stable workers struggling earlier with the mule from Tartarus now seem absorbed in their tasks. One man adjusts a saddle strap with practiced ease, while another trims a horse's mane into tidy lines. You sense pride in their movements, an understanding that competence in their work protects them from harsher fates. You drift into the garden again, where a young servant arranges fresh flowers into a vase for the dining area. He selects each bloom thoughtfully, turning them just so to catch the lantern light. "Beautiful," another worker murmurs to him. "It'll impress the guests." The boy shrugs, but you see the faint flush of satisfaction on his face. You realize gradually that these moments of pride aren't luxuries, they're survival tactics. When you can't control your circumstances, you cling to the things you can control: precision, talent, skill. In a world where punishment hangs like a shadow over every breath, excellence becomes a form of resistance. Historians still argue whether enslaved workers who showed exceptional skill were rewarded with gentler treatment or exploited even harder. Watching these people tonight, you suspect the truth is both. Rome was too complex, too contradictory to offer a single answer. As evening approaches, the household takes its final preparatory steps. Lamps are lit, bowls are arranged, cushions are fluffed. The cook tastes the soup one last time and nods. "Perfect," he announces. Everyone exhales. You can almost feel the house preparing to inhale again once the guests arrive. And as you step back into the hallway, the scent of herbs and polished bronze following you, you sense the narrative pulling you toward another deeply personal dimension of Roman domestic life. The blurred, perilous boundaries of intimacy and close quarters. The lamps glow softer now, their light pooling in warm circles across polished floors and painted walls. Evening in a Roman household brings a strange quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but muted, as if everyone is holding their breath. Guests will arrive soon, the family prepares, the slaves prepare harder. And as you drift through the domus, you begin to notice something subtle, almost invisible unless you know where to look. The closeness of lives stacked uncomfortably together. The blurred lines where duty meets personal space, where whispers travel farther than footsteps, where secrets cling to corners like dust. Tonight you're walking into intimacy, boundaries, silence, the emotional architecture beneath Roman domestic life. You slip into the corridor outside the cubicular, the private bedrooms. The air grows stiller here, thicker. Slaves move more cautiously, aware that the wrong sound outside a sleeping master's door can bring a whole morning's worth of consequences. You overhear the steward advising the young man you've been following. Never enter these rooms unless summoned. Knock softly. Speak only if required. His tone is firm but not unkind. These walls, he adds, tapping one with a knuckle, have long memories. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. Many Roman households assigned 1 or 2 close attendant slaves to their masters and mistresses, body servants who helped with dressing, bathing, hair, even nighttime tasks. These attendants were always nearby, sleeping in doorways or antechambers so they could be summoned instantly. It created a proximity so intimate that the lines between personal life and enforced service blurred beyond recognition. You pass one such attendant now, a girl of 16 kneeling beside her mistress, brushing scented oil through her hair. The mistress speaks softly, offering idle conversation about jewellery or tomorrow's errands. The girl nods, smiles at the right moments, and hides any flickers of her real thoughts. The closeness is gentle on the surface, but underneath it lies necessity, not choice. The mistress doesn't truly know the girl, and the girl is trained not to truly be known. You drift toward the bath chamber, where a middle-aged male attendant prepares oils and towels for the master's evening wash. He moves with quiet efficiency, everything placed exactly where it should be. Another slave enters and murmurs, "He's in a good mood tonight. Lucky." The attendant snorts, "Luck never lasts." Joke 1, dry and whispered between folded towels. The chamber itself is warm and scented with myrrh. The moment borders on intimacy, but not friendship, not family. Something else entirely. Forced closeness, ritualized privacy, a dynamic built on unequal footing. You feel the discomfort radiating beneath the smooth surface. You step away, drifting toward the narrow servant sleeping spaces off the side hallway. It takes you a moment to recognize them because they're barely rooms at all. Small alcoves with thin mats and a single clay lamp each. Some slaves sleep sitting upright beside a master's door. Others curl in corners of hallways. The concept of personal space dissolves here like mist. You watch as the textile woman from earlier settles onto her mat. She sighs deeply, stretching her fingers, still cramped from hours of work. Across from her, another slave adjusts her blanket, keeping one ear turned toward the mistress's door. "She sometimes calls at night," she whispers, "for water or to check the shutters." The textile woman nods. "Mine used to wake me just to talk," she shrugs. "I listened." There's resilience in that shrug, the practiced emotional flexibility of someone who straddles duty and empathy without falling apart. A quirky fringe tidbit tickles your memory. Some elite Romans believed dreams travelled through doorways, so they placed certain slaves near entrances to shield them from nightmares. Whether superstition or convenience, the result was the same. Slaves slept where privacy evaporated. You wander toward the triclinium where the family lounges before dinner. A young boy leans against the household tutor, a Greek man whose calm voice guides him through a recitation of poetry. Their closeness seems affectionate, but you know it's structured, conditional. The boy adores the tutor. The tutor must navigate affection without crossing invisible lines. If he becomes too familiar, he risks reprimand. If he becomes too distant, he risks dismissal. A tightrope made of conversation and caution. Across the room, a pair of enslaved servers rehearse the proper way to pour wine. One holding the mixing bowl, the other practicing a graceful tilt. Their movements are almost dance-like, but beneath the elegance lies a collective unspoken rule. Do not spill, do not stumble, do not become a spectacle. Guests will be watching, masters will be judging. Silence will be expected unless spoken to. As you step closer, the servers whisper to each other. "Remember last time? She ordered me to stand behind her for half the night. Your legs must have died." "Oh, completely." They muffle their laughter. Joke 2, quiet rebellion disguised as humour. Later, near the garden, you catch an accidental moment of tenderness. The new young man helps an older slave with a crate that's too heavy for one person. "Careful," the older man whispers. "Your back will hate you tomorrow." The young man smiles faintly. "My back already hates me." They share a soft chuckle. Not friendship exactly. Something smaller but precious. Humanity finding footholds wherever it can. Then, in the peristyle, you catch the other kind of moment, the one no one speaks about aloud. A master enters unexpectedly, and a young serving girl freezes, body tense. His gaze lingers a fraction too long. She lowers her eyes immediately, stepping back in practiced avoidance. The steward appears within seconds, subtle, deliberate, and redirects the girl. You feel your pulse spike. Intimacy in Rome is not always safe, not always consensual, not always dignified. The tension hangs in the air like a thread drawn too tight. Historians still argue whether close household positions offered more protection or more vulnerability. Some slaves gained favoritism, lighter workloads, gentler treatment. Others faced the opposite, constant access becoming constant danger. The truth, like everything in Rome, lived in contradictions. As the household finally dims into night, you move through the quiet rooms, feeling the boundaries that shape every breath inside these walls. Too close, never close enough, seen constantly, seen never as a full person, lives woven into a tapestry where the threads can't easily separate. You step outside into the courtyard, where the night air finally feels cool and open again. Behind you, the house hums with its tangled intimacy. Fragile, fraught, and fiercely navigated every day. And tomorrow, before dawn, news and whispers will travel between these same figures in the shadows. Because Rome's enslaved population has its own invisible web, one you're about to step into next. The night deepens, and the domus finally sighs into something resembling sleep. But beyond its walls, Rome is still very much awake. You step into the street, letting the cool air settle on your skin, and almost immediately you sense it. The quiet, pulsing presence of an invisible network woven through the alleys, workshops, fountains, and marketplaces of the city. This web doesn't appear on any map. It isn't recorded in any official document, but it is real, alive, and essential. Tonight, you're stepping into citywide slave networks, the hidden channels through which enslaved people share warnings, favors, information, and the subtle threads of community that help them endure. You follow the faint glow of street lamps down a side path, passing clusters of workers returning from late shifts. Some move silently, exhausted. Others walk in pairs or trios, murmuring to each other. At first, the conversations sound like ordinary end-of-day chatter, but listen closely and you hear the coded cadence beneath it. Not gossip, not idle talk, but survival. A woman at a well draws water while whispering to another, "The mistress in that house on the corner. Kind today, but tomorrow." The second woman nods knowingly. Kindness is weather. Never trust the forecast. Joke 1. Dark, true, delivered with a tired smirk. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Enslaved people in Rome were everywhere. They outnumbered free laborers in many neighborhoods. They cooked in taverns, hauled goods in markets, swept bathhouses, carried messages for wealthy patrons, tended public gardens, repaired streets, and sold trinkets at kiosks owned by their masters. Their presence created informal networks, dense, resilient, and constantly shifting. You watch as a young man you haven't seen before exchanges a quick gesture with an older enslaved vendor. A nod, a blink, a tilt of the chin, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The vendor slips him a small crust of bread. The young man mutters thanks before disappearing into a crowd. No coin exchanged, no questions asked, just a flicker of solidarity. Further down the street, a group of enslaved workers gathers beside a baker's shop, the warm smell of loaves drifting into the night. They sit on low crates, stretching their legs. One rubs his shoulders and groans. "Long day," he says. Another replies, "All days are long." The first man snorts. "True, but this one felt especially long." Joke 2. Rome's version of worker banter. They begin swapping information. Who's selling whom? Which households are hiring? Which overseers are cruel? Which ones can be swayed? You realize this is vital intel, Rome's unofficial resistance network. Not rebellion, not plotting, just survival notes, a map of human danger zones updated daily. A quirky fringe tidbit pops into your memory. Some enslaved people served as city messengers, running notes between households. These runners became unwitting information hubs, learning news days before it reached the Senate floor. Some even provided unofficial postal service between enslaved communities. Imagine slipping a friend a message about a new master's temperament, the same way teens trade notes in class. You follow a narrow alley where a soft melody floats through the air. a group of enslaved musicians gathers in the courtyard of a tavern, tuning lyres and pipes for the evening crowd. But tonight, no customers are here yet. They play quietly to themselves, melancholic, beautiful. A young serving girl sits nearby, eyes closed, letting the music wash over her. For a moment, nobody is being ordered, inspected, or corrected. They're just living. Then one musician stops abruptly. "Hear the news?" he whispers. The others lean in. A man down on the Aventine was beaten for speaking to a guest without being asked. A low ripple of anger spreads through the group. "Which household?" someone asks. "Domitius," he replies. The musicians exchange glances. Domitius is known in whispers as a tyrant. One shakes his head. "Tell the others. No one should take work there." The music resumes, but you feel the tension lingering in the notes. As you drift back toward a larger street, you notice a pair of enslaved children carrying baskets. They're small, nimble, bundled in tunics too big for them. One whispers, "Did you hear? The baker on the corner gives scraps to kids if you sweep his steps." The other nods eagerly. Information spreads like wildfire among the young, fast, precise, essential. You turn toward the Tiber, following the slow rush of river water. There, a group of dock workers, most of them enslaved, sit on overturned crates, sharing food and quiet conversation. One man tells a joke so crude you can feel it from 10 feet away, and the others burst into laughter muffled by river wind. You don't catch every word, but their laughter carries something rare, a momentary lightness. The oldest among them clears his throat and says, "A new shipment arrived from the east. Some looked sick." Another nods grimly. "Tell the healers. They'll know what herbs to gather." You raise your eyebrows. "Healers?" "Yes, another network." Some enslaved people learned herbal medicine, passing remedies through whispered lessons. They couldn't prevent every illness, but they could save lives in quiet ways Rome never acknowledged. Historians still argue whether these networks existed intentionally or grew naturally from shared spaces. But watching these interactions tonight, you feel the answer in your bones. Both. When a population is scattered yet omnipresent, controlled yet interconnected, community emerges through necessity. A familiar figure appears near a fountain, the older textile woman from the household you visited. She draws water, nodding at two other enslaved women. "Busy day?" one asks. She sighs. "Aren't they all?" They exchange updates. Which vendors are fair, which streets are safe at night, which guards take bribes, which don't. Their voices are soft, but their information is sharp, essential. You trail the new young man as he walks beside the textile woman. This is his first night outside the domus since purchase. His eyes dart nervously. She pats his arm. "You'll learn the city," she murmurs. "We all do. Keep your ears open and your mouth closed. Most of the time." Joke 3. Gentle advice wrapped in humour. A faint breeze stirs the lamps, making their flames twist like whispered secrets. Around you, Rome's enslaved population moves in subtle coordination, avoiding trouble, sharing warnings, offering tiny acts of support. No rebellions here. No grand plans. Just webs of connection that turn a brutal system into something survivable. As you step back toward the domus, you realize these networks, unseen, unrecorded, hold more than information. They hold hope, resilience, and the fragile threads of identity. And tomorrow, those threads will be carried into shrines and whispered prayers, pulling you into the next chapter of this quiet, relentless world. Dawn brushes pale light over Rome, but you're already awake, moving through the quiet alleys with the early risers, the bakers, the water carriers, the slaves sent out before sunrise to fetch, gather, pray, or simply breathe for a moment before the machine of the day roars back to life. Today, you feel a softer pull guiding you beyond the noise of labour and gossip, toward the things enslaved people clung to most desperately: religion, spirits, and small hopes that offered comfort where law and circumstance refused it. You follow a woman carrying a basket of olive branches tucked under her arm. Her steps are purposeful but unhurried, like someone walking towards something sacred. She pauses at a modest street shrine built into a niche in the wall. Just a small ledge with a clay figure of a household spirit, a few faded offerings, and a tiny lamp still flickering from last night. She kneels, sets the olive branches down, and murmurs a prayer. You can't catch all her words, but you hear enough to understand protection, strength, patience. She touches the shrine gently before standing again, her expression steadier than before. A mainstream historical fact floats up. Enslaved people in Rome were not barred from religion. In fact, many participated in the household cults, public festivals, and private rituals that threaded through Roman life. Worship wasn't just spiritual, it was social, communal, and sometimes one of the few ways an enslaved person could carve out a sliver of personal agency. Another man approaches the same shrine after she leaves. He sets down a small loaf of bread, more crumb than loaf really, and whispers a name you don't recognize. Maybe a lost friend, maybe someone sold far away, maybe a bit of hope he's sending into the universe like a message in a bottle. You feel a quiet ache settle in your chest. You step into a larger street where shops are just beginning to open. A few enslaved workers sweep the thresholds, pausing occasionally to make the sign of protection with their fingers. Long day ahead, one mutters. May the gods look away when we mess up. His friend snickers. They usually do. Joke one, soft, wry, and painfully practical. You wander toward the forum, where a small cluster of enslaved people gather around a vendor selling cheap incense sticks. Most are plain, but a few are tinted blue or red with fragrant resins. A young man picks one up and smiles faintly. My mother used to burn these, he says. His companion nudges him. Then burn one. The gods won't mind. The young man hesitates, then hands over a single coin, one he probably can't spare, and buys the incense anyway. When he lights it at a roadside altar, the smoke curls upward like a fragile wish. A quirky, fringed tidbit rises from memory. Some enslaved people believed that humming certain melodies while working could please minor spirits who eased labour. A superstition, maybe. But you notice a woman humming, quietly as she sorts vegetables outside a tavern. The notes form a pattern, rising and falling like a breath. Whether music or prayer, it shapes the rhythm of her morning. You follow a narrow path to a small temple, where a few enslaved workers sweep the steps as part of their daily duties. One pauses to press a hand to a carved depiction of Fortuna, goddess of luck. Another bows before Mercury, patron of travellers and messengers. You overhear them whisper wishes as they work, not for wealth or status, but for gentler masters, lighter burdens, healthy children, safe nights, wishes shaped by reality. A priest emerges yawning and nods approvingly at their work. The gods bless diligence, he says. One of the workers mutters under his breath, wish they'd bless shorter work days. Joke too ripples out, causing a few suppressed grins. As you drift farther, you encounter a quiet courtyard where the household you've been following gathers before beginning their chores. Someone has placed a small offering near the lararium, the shrine dedicated to household guardian spirits. The steward lights a tiny taper and murmurs a blessing. Surprisingly, he gestures for the young man, the new arrival, to step closer. You may offer something, he says. The young man hesitates, then places a sprig of rosemary on the shrine. The gesture is simple, but his hands tremble slightly. This is his first small step into belonging, however fragile. Nearby, another slave sits cross-legged, whispering a prayer in a language not Latin, not Greek. Something older, softer around the edges. His ritual is different, foreign to Rome, but nobody stops him. In the cracks of the empire, personal gods survive. Historians still argue whether Rome's enslaved population blended their native religions with Roman ones out of belief or necessity. Watching these scenes, you suspect it's both. Faith bends but doesn't break. It reshapes itself around the life that remains. You follow the young man into the garden, where he helps light lamps for the day's tasks. He pauses once more at a corner shrine, touching it lightly with 2 fingers. For strength, he whispers. Just enough to get through. The prayer isn't loud, but you feel it resonate. Later, as he fetches water, he encounters a girl from another household who gives him a sympathetic smile. First week, she asks. He nods. She reaches into her tunic and pulls out a tiny clay charm shaped like a bird. Protection, she says simply. My mother made it. He hesitates. I can't take that. She presses it into his palm. She'd want someone to use it. He closes his fingers around it, grateful beyond words. As they part, you overhear her whispering a small prayer of her own, not for herself, but for him. That kind of kindness feels like a flicker of sunlight through storm clouds. Before you return to the household, you pass one last scene, a group of enslaved workers sitting on the steps of a bathhouse sharing a quiet moment before the day begins. One says, "The gods help those who help themselves." Another replies, "Then the gods need to help me help myself out of this job." Joke 3 earns a low rumble of laughter. But when the laughter fades, something steadier remains. Hope. Thin, fragile, but persistent. Hopes for freedom. Hopes for protection. Hopes for a life beyond this one. Hopes whispered into shrines, woven into charms, hummed into melodies, tucked into pockets like tiny sacred secrets. As you step back into the domus and feel the day beginning to swell around you, you sense the next chapter stirring. The long, difficult road towards something every enslaved person dreams of, even when they're afraid to say it aloud: freedom. The day stretches on, and with it comes a noticeable shift. Not in the masters, not in the work, but in the enslaved people themselves. Beneath the steady rhythm of chores and commands, you begin to sense a quiet undercurrent pulsing through the household. Possibility. Not for everyone, not all the time, but here and there, tucked in the corners of conversations, in the careful saving of coins, in the way certain slaves carry themselves with a strange, cautious confidence. Tonight, you're stepping into paths toward freedom, the narrow routes, winding rituals, and fraught hopes that might, if luck, timing, and temperament align, lead an enslaved person out of bondage. You follow the young man into the storage room where the steward tallies supplies. The small clay lamp flickers, illuminating shelves of grain, oil, wine, baskets, tools, all the ordinary items of the household economy. But the steward is counting something else tonight. Peculium. A concept that sounds like a miracle and a trap at the same time. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. Some enslaved people in Rome were allowed to accumulate peculium, a kind of personal savings fund technically owned by their masters, but often treated informally as the slave's own. Peculium could buy better clothing, small comforts, and in rare cases, even freedom. It wasn't a right, it was permission. But permission, in a world this tightly controlled, meant everything. You watch as the steward hands a small wooden token to an older slave. "Your peculium is now 6 denarii, he says. The man nods respectfully, though you catch a flicker of pride in his eyes. 6 denarii won't buy freedom. But it begins something. Outside, the textile woman whispers to the new young man, "Save what you can, even a little. You never know when opportunity comes." He frowns. "Does it come often?" She laughs, not unkindly but knowingly. "No, but it comes." A younger man polishing silver nearby leans in and adds, "Some masters free loyal slaves in their wills," another scoffs. "Some, not many." The silver polisher shrugs. "Enough to hope." Joke 1, soft, half jaded, half sincere. You drift into the peristyle garden, where 3 slaves gather near the fountain during a rare quiet moment. One explains how his former master once promised manumission after 10 years of service but died before fulfilling it. His son honoured it, the man says, but only after I managed the estate accounts perfectly for another 5. His tone is bitter, but beneath it lies something else. The knowledge that he earned his freedom twice over. A quirky fringe tidbit emerges. Some enslaved people, especially skilled ones, negotiated informal agreements with their masters. Deals like work this contract, or earn this much profit, or manage this business, and then buy themselves out. These were risky arrangements, prone to manipulation and betrayal, but they also represented one of the few structured paths toward manumission. You wander toward the atrium, where the master sits dictating a letter to his scribe. A literate enslaved man with ink-stained fingers and an expression carved out of patience. When the dictation ends, the master dismisses him curtly. The scribe walks away, shoulders straight, carrying the quiet dignity of someone who knows his value. You follow him into the corridor where another enslaved man asks, "Did he mention your freedom?" The scribe shakes his head. "Not yet, but he's old, and I'm useful." Another slave murmurs, "Be careful. Usefulness keeps you close, but it can also keep you bound." Historians still argue whether high-skilled slaves were more or less likely to be freed. The contradiction hangs in the air like incense smoke. Later, in the kitchen, the cook tells the new young man a story while preparing herbs. "My cousin," he begins, "bought his freedom by saving every extra coin the master's guests slipped him." The young man blinks. "People give slaves coins?" The cook shrugs. "Sometimes, when they're drunk, when they're grateful, when they feel soft-hearted, store it away. Don't spend it on pastries." The young man nods. "I don't even like pastries." The cook's eyebrow shoots up. "Everyone likes pastries." Joke 2, delivered with kitchen authority. As dusk settles, you join a group of enslaved workers walking to a nearby shrine. Tonight is a festival for Liber, a god symbolizing freedom and growth. A small crowd gathers, lighting candles, offering fruit, whispering wishes. One man kneels and says softly, "May I see another summer as a free man." Another follows, "May my children never know chains." Their prayers hang in the air, fragile and luminous. You notice the young man you've been following standing at the edge of the shrine, hesitant. One of the older slaves nudges him gently. "Go on." He steps forward, lights a tiny wick and whispers something too soft to hear. His fingers tremble. Whatever he asked for, it means everything to him. Back at the domus, the steward gathers a few trusted slaves. "Master has been speaking. Of manumission," he says quietly. "No decisions yet, but behave well." You watch their faces shift. Hope, fear, skepticism. Freedom is both dream and gamble. Too much hope can make a person reckless. Too little can break them. You drift into the small storage area where records are kept. You scan the wax tablets, lists of tasks, expenses, property, and sometimes, at the bottom, a name followed by Libertus, freedman. You trace one such entry. The person is now gone from the household, living somewhere in the city, navigating a new life with old ties. Freedom, yes, but with obligations. The textile woman appears beside you. "If you're freed," she says softly, "you owe your former master respect, service, loyalty, sometimes money." You nod. Freedom here isn't a clean cut. It's more like a knot slowly untangled but never entirely undone. The new young man listens nearby and asks, "Is it worth it?" She smiles sadly. "Even a chain made of silk is still a chain. Better to loosen it than keep the whole weight." As night deepens, you step outside the domus, feeling the complex, precarious architecture of hope swirling around you. Peculium, promises, rituals, trust, skill, strategy, all fragile pathways, each requiring luck and the goodwill of people who may not have much goodwill to spare. And tomorrow you'll see what happens when those paths succeed, what it truly means to be freed but not free, living between worlds in a Rome that never fully lets go. Morning in Rome blooms pale and hazy, its first light draping the city in soft gold. But today, instead of stepping back into the domus, you follow another path, trailing someone whose life has just shifted in the most profound yet complicated way imaginable. A man who, after years of service, has finally been freed. But freedom in Rome doesn't snap a chain cleanly. It unwinds it slowly, leaving threads still wrapped around the wrist. Tonight, you're stepping into the strange in-between world of the freed but not free, the daily reality of a Libertus, someone emancipated yet still bound by obligation, expectation, and the long shadow of the man who owned him. You first spot him near the Forum, a middle-aged man named Lucius, newly manumitted just 2 weeks ago. He walks differently now, not with pride, not with swagger, but with a cautious looseness, like someone still getting used to the idea that he can choose his own speed. He pauses at a vendor selling figs, fingertips brushing the fruit. The vendor smiles warmly. "Lucius, buying for yourself today?" Lucius nods, though the motion still feels tentative. For years, every purchase was on someone else's behalf. A mainstream historical fact eases into your thoughts. Freed slaves automatically became clients of their former masters, who became their patrons. This relationship granted some protection and opportunity, but it also ensured ongoing obligations. A freed person was never entirely severed from the household that once owned them. Lucius pays for the figs with his own coins, not peculium, not gifted payment, but his earnings from work he now chooses. The moment is small, but the pride in his eyes speaks volumes. You follow him through the forum as he greets people he once passed silently. Some nod respectfully. Freed people often held respected roles as artisans, merchants, scribes. Others look slightly downward, never forgetting that Lucius used to be property. Rome's memory is long, and its social boundaries are etched deep. He stops by a stall selling writing supplies. "More ink?" the vendor asks. Lucius smiles. Business is growing. He's started a small transcription service, copying letters and contracts for locals, something he excelled at while enslaved. You notice his hands no longer tremble when he writes. Skill carried him through bondage. Now it carries him into autonomy. But autonomy, you soon learn, comes at a cost. Later, Lucius walks into the atrium of his former master's domus. He steps more confidently now, but he still lowers his eyes slightly when the master greets him. Old habits cling like dust. The master smiles, overly warm. "Lucius, my friend, you'll attend me at the forum today, yes?" Lucius nods. "Of course he will. A patron can request services, and a freedman must oblige. It's not slavery, but it's not freedom unbound either." As they walk together, the master waves Lucius forward like a trusted assistant. They discuss property matters, debts, and business connections. Another former slave in the crowd whispers, "Still working for him?" Lucius shrugs. "Better than working for someone cruel." Joke 1. Gentle, resigned, and painfully realistic. By midday, the master dismisses Lucius with a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Visit tomorrow," he says. Lucius bows slightly, not deeply but enough to show the expected respect. When the master leaves, Lucius exhales, long and slow. You walk with him past a row of taverns. Inside one, a group of freeborn Romans glance at Lucius and then look away. One mutters, "Freedman." The tone isn't hostile, but it isn't welcoming either. Lucius hears it. He straightens his tunic. Rome's social ladder is tall, and even those who climb a few rungs are reminded of the height above them. A quirky fringe tidbit pops into your thoughts. Freed people often adopted their former master's name as part of their own, signalling both gratitude and dependency. Lucius now carries a name that honors the man who freed him, but it also marks him permanently as someone who was once owned. You continue walking until Lucius arrives at a modest apartment building, the kind bustling with tradesmen, freed people, and families scraping by. Inside, a woman greets him warmly, his wife, also a former slave. She beams when he hands her the figs. "You bought these?" she asks. "For us?" Lucius nods shyly, like someone learning joy for the first time. They sit together at a small wooden table, sharing the fruit slowly, savouring each bite. A luxury they once only prepared for others. But the peace doesn't last long. A neighbour bursts in, panicked. "The landlord raised the rent again," she complains. "How are we supposed to survive?" Lucius rubs his temples. "I'll try to speak with him," he offers. The neighbour sighs. He doesn't listen to freedmen. Joke 2. Dark humour wrapped in harsh truth. Later, Lucius visits the workshop where he hopes to secure a contract. The foreman looks him over and says, "You're skilled, but I need someone who can work nights." Lucius hesitates. His patron expects him tomorrow morning. Conflicted, he answers, "I'll try." The foreman nods without committing. Freedom comes with choices, but also with conflicts. Lucius is learning that choosing one obligation may cost him another. On your way back toward the forum with him, you pass a group of enslaved workers carrying stone blocks. Lucius pauses. A decade ago, that was him. Sweat, dust, no future. One worker glances his way, eyes flicking to Lucius's freedman's cap. Lucius gives him a tiny nod. The worker nods back, a silent exchange of hope, or maybe longing. Historians still argue whether freed people were genuinely embraced by Roman society or kept on its margins. Watching Lucius navigate his day, you sense the answer is complicated. Rome opened doors but placed thresholds behind them. As evening approaches, Lucius returns to his apartment. He lights a small clay lamp, the one object he bought on the day of his manumission, and sets it carefully by the window. His wife joins him. They whisper about tomorrow's work, about debts, about the possibility of having children who will be born free. Freedom here isn't a triumphant march. It's a fragile balancing act, a soft-spoken hope, a life with new responsibilities stacked atop old loyalties. Lucius sits quietly, staring at the lamp's glow, and you hear him murmur, "At least now, the choices are mine." And as the wick flickers, casting a warm halo across the room, you feel the story widen again, pulling you beyond this single household and into the Empire's grand machinery, economic, political, relentless. The market wasn't just a place, it was the engine, and tomorrow you'll see its gears in motion. The morning light spills over Rome like someone has gently shaken gold dust across the rooftops. But today, instead of focusing on households, freed people, or training yards, you feel yourself drawn upward, toward a wider view. The city feels different when you zoom out. Bigger, hungrier, more intricately wired, because Rome doesn't just use enslaved labor, it functions because of it. Tonight you're stepping into the broad, humming machinery of the empire, the vast system of supply, demand, politics and power that keeps the slave market alive. This is the market's larger machinery, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You climb a slight rise overlooking the forum. Merchants roll open their shutters, scribes shuffle to their posts, and ox carts rumble past, groaning under stone, lumber, grain, wine, and occasionally chained human cargo. The city looks like a single organism waking up, each district a limb, each alley a vein, each worker, free or enslaved, a cell performing its function. It's strangely beautiful if you forget for a moment what fuels it. A mainstream historical fact settles in place. Rome's economy was deeply dependent on enslaved labor. Estates, quarries, mines, workshops, farms, households, bathhouses, temples, ports, all relied on people who had no choice. Without them, the empire wouldn't collapse instantly, but it would quake, listing like a ship without ballast. You walk into the forum and instantly feel the pulse of commerce. A senator in a bright white toga gestures animatedly as he lectures a group of younger elites. "Our estates in Sicily," he declares, "produce more wheat with 50 good slaves than 100 free labourers." You raise an eyebrow. The younger men nod approvingly, scribbling notes on wax tablets, like students in a lecture hall. The senator beams. "Efficiency," he says, "is the backbone of empire." You whisper, "An exploitation is the backbone of your efficiency." Joke 1, aimed squarely at his immaculate sandals. Nearby, a group of merchants debate grain prices. "Carthage is sending less this year," one says. "Storms ruin the coastal harvest." Another shrugs. "Then we'll expand further inland. New fields, new labour." They speak of labour the way someone else might discuss barrels or crates. Units, not humans. A quirky fringe tidbit floats up. Some wealthy Romans purchased entire farming communities, slaves born and raised on a single estate, generation after generation. These slave villages had their own internal structures, roles, and even informal traditions. They weren't recognised legally, but socially, absolutely. Like tiny sub-communities swallowed by the greater machine, you turn toward the Capitoline Hill, where political arguments spill into the street like wine from an overturned cup. Today, a debate rages about military expansion. A young politician, ambitious, loud, and very fond of gesturing, proclaims, "New provinces bring wealth, land, tribute, and workers." The crowd murmurs approval. Someone in the back shouts, "More captives mean cheaper prices." The politician smirks, not denying it. Historians still argue whether Roman wars were motivated primarily by security, ambition, or economic incentive. But standing here, watching senators casually link conquest to labour supply, you feel the answer leaning heavily toward all of the above, but mostly labour. You drift toward the financial district where moneylenders crack their knuckles over scrolls of debt. One berates a man who owes him 30 denarii. "Pay in coin, or pay in bodies," the moneylender snaps. Your stomach tightens. Another lender leans out from his stall. "I have room for one more bondservant," he calls. The debtor lowers his head. Rome may not have modern bankruptcy laws, but it sure has creative ways to fill the labour pool. At the port district, the machinery hums even louder. Ships unload cargo crates. Dock workers shout instructions. Overseers bark orders. You notice the ratio of enslaved labour to freemen shifts here. 3 to 1, maybe 4 to 1. Without this workforce, the port would choke on its own commerce. You approach a warehouse where amphorae of wine are being rolled inside. Two enslaved men talk quietly as they work. Another caravan arrives tonight, one says. From where? Cilicia. Pirates again, of course. They roll their eyes in perfect synchrony. Joke 2 rises effortlessly from their shared exasperation. A dockmaster strides past, muttering to himself, "Short-handed again? I need 50 more men by next week." You overhear another man reply, "Talk to Gaius. He knows traders who can get you fresh stock." The dockmaster snorts. "Fresh stock? They're people, not grain." A beat. "But yes, I'll speak to Gaius." A moral line drawn, then immediately tripped over. You wander deeper into the industrial quarter. Tanneries, metal workshops, and brickyards. The air smells of chemicals, heat, sweat. This is where enslaved labour drives the engine of production, grinding, pounding, shaping raw resources into the materials that build Rome's splendour. A foreman scolds a worker for dropping a mould. "Do you know how much bronze costs?" he snaps. The worker mutters under his breath. "Do you know how much I cost?" Joke 3, whispered rebellion wrapped in sarcasm. Walking past a brickyard, you hear rhythmic thuds, slaves pressing clay into moulds, turning them out, stacking them to dry. The repetition is hypnotic, like the beating heart of the empire. You meet a man who has been making bricks for 20 years. "I built half this city," he says with a shrug, "and no one knows my name." His eyes shine, not with pride, but with a deep, unshakable truth. As you continue, a realization settles. The market isn't just a marketplace. It's part of a vast ecosystem linking war, agriculture, construction, trade, and politics. Prices rise when wars slow. Prices fall when peace holds. Demand increases when estates expand. Supply fluctuates with conquest, piracy, debt, and famine. Rome behaves like a living creature whose survival depends on the quiet suffering of an unseen population. You wander toward the Temple of Saturn, where officials oversee the treasury. A scribe drones numbers to a magistrate. Tax revenues, trade tariffs, grain subsidies. But between the lines, you hear the thing nobody says aloud, that the empire's prosperity rests on unpaid labour. Without it, everything, temples, markets, palaces, armies, would begin to wobble. As the day wanes, Rome's bustle softens. The crowd thins. Smoke rises from hundreds of hearths, and you feel a sudden pull to return to the slave market, where this entire system converges into one loud, glaring intersection. You arrive at dusk. The platforms stand dark now, empty. The placards hang motionless. The sawdust smells faintly of oil and sweat. In the silence, the weight of everything you've witnessed settles like dust over stone. This isn't just a market, it's a mirror, reflecting everything Rome is and everything it chooses not to see. And as you turn to leave, dawn threatens the horizon again, pulling you toward your final chapter, where the echoes of what you've witnessed cling to you, urging reflection as you walk away from the market's heart. Dawn presses gently against the horizon as you make your way back toward the slave market, the place where this journey began. The air is cooler now, tinged with the faint metallic scent of last night's torches and the earthy undertone of trampled sawdust. The square is quiet, emptied of buyers and sellers, stripped of the noise and spectacle that filled it hours earlier. Without the crowds, the platforms look smaller, their shadows longer, their purpose starker. You step into the centre of the square, the echo of your footsteps brushing against the wooden boards. The silence feels almost reverent, as if the market itself is holding its breath after a long, demanding night. And as you stand there, in the dim half-light, you feel the weight of everything you've witnessed settle around you. Soft at first, then dense, then unmistakably heavy. This final stretch isn't about transactions or hierarchies. It's about echoes as you depart, the impressions that linger, the doubts that surface, the contradictions that refuse to stay neatly folded. A lone street cleaner sweeps the debris left behind. His broom swishes through dust and crushed herbs and a dropped placard. "Another night done," he mutters, "and another one coming." You nod, even though he can't hear you. That's Rome, isn't it? Never one night, never one day, but an endless cycle of renewal built on the same old foundation. A mainstream historical fact flickers in your mind. The Roman slave market wasn't just a local economic hub. It was part of a vast imperial engine. People passed through this square from every frontier, from every war, from every corner of an empire too large to map with certainty. Some were sold once, some many times, some found gentler homes, others vanished into mines or quarries or distant fields. Millions of lives intersected here over centuries, their stories mostly undocumented, their voices mostly lost. You step between the platforms, imagining the murmurs that once filled this space. A seller declaring skills with theatrical bravado, a buyer sniffing for bargains, a frightened girl gripping her own breath, a man trying not to shake under scrutiny, laughter, lies, bidding, pleading, hope, resignation. This square absorbed all of it, night after night, until the voices became part of its stones. A quirky fringe tidbit rises. Some Romans believed certain market spaces absorbed emotion, joy, fear, anger, and released it during storms, the way old buildings creak when winter settles in. You look up at the sky, half expecting clouds to materialize just to prove the point. A pair of pigeons hop across a platform, pecking at seeds left behind. Their cooing echoes oddly in the empty space. Maybe they're the only impartial witnesses to what happens here, flitting over human suffering with feather-light detachment. You whisper, "Lucky birds," and one of them looks offended. Joke 1, unexpectedly pigeon-based. A merchant arrives to inspect his stall for the coming evening. He stretches, yawns, scratches his beard. "Long night yesterday," he mutters. "Prices were low, maybe today will be better." You blink. Better for whom? Joke 2 forms quietly in your chest, a sigh wrapped in irony. As he moves away, you feel the air shift. Somewhere behind you, a group of early workers enters the square. Slaves cleaning, sellers preparing, overseers checking supplies. Their presence stirs the dust, wakes the platforms, resurrects the machinery. Soon, the market will come alive again. Soon, voices will replace silence. You step toward the edge of the square, pausing one last time to look back. Memories, your memories from this long night, flutter behind your ribs. Training yards, specialist platforms, rumors of revolt, daily routines, punishments, pride, secrets whispered in corridors, networks stretching across Rome, shrines glowing with fragile hope, paths toward freedom, lives rebuilt, half rebuilt, or never rebuilt at all. Historians still argue whether Rome's slave system was more brutal than others of the ancient world, or simply larger, more organized, more enduring. But standing here, surrounded by the stillness before another cycle begins, you feel the debate dissolve into something simpler. Every system that treats humans as resources carries a shadow too heavy to fully measure. You touch the wooden edge of a platform. It's smooth, where hundreds of hands have held on, some trembling, some resigned, some defiant. You imagine your own reflection on that wood joining, the faint echoes carved into its grain. The market doesn't care about you, but the stories you carry out of it, those matter. As the sun begins to rise, warming the tips of the columns and rooftops, you turn and step away. The square fades behind you, shrinking. But the echoes follow, not loud or haunting, but steady, reminding you that understanding history means holding its contradictions gently, carefully, honestly. And as you walk down the quiet street, Rome exhales again, already preparing to inhale you back into its vast, relentless rhythm. Now, as the sun lifts slowly over Rome's rooftops, let your breath soften with it. The noise of the market fades into the distance, not abruptly, but gently, like a heavy curtain drawn closed at the end of a long play. You're still walking, yes, but your steps grow slower, lighter, almost weightless against the cobblestones. The city is waking up far behind you, but here, in this quiet moment, the streets feel warm and safe, carrying none of the tension or sharp edges that filled the night. Let the air settle around you, let your shoulders loosen. Each inhale is longer now, smoother, as if your lungs finally have room to stretch. You've travelled through shadows and stories, through crowded squares and silent rooms, through fear and hope braided so tightly they were hard to separate. And now, with the journey complete, those threads begin to loosen. They fall softly behind you, no longer pulling, no longer demanding your attention. Imagine a gentle breeze brushing past, just enough to cool your cheeks, just enough to steady your breathing. The lamps along the street flicker faintly before extinguishing one by one, leaving behind a calm softness that feels almost like dusk, even though dawn is rising. Rome for once grows distant, and you, steadily, quietly, grow still. Let the last images fade. The platforms, the torches, the murmurs, the unspoken truths. They drift away like morning mist, thinning until they vanish completely. All that remains is your own gentle awareness, warm and unburdened. So now, rest your mind. Let your thoughts slow into something quiet and kind. You've walked far enough for one night. It's okay to close your eyes, and let sleep find you, softly,